The night was thick with silence, but the heavens whispered secrets that only the stars could understand. Beneath those shimmering skies, a lone figure knelt in the dust, his trembling hands lifting a clay tablet toward the heavens. He didn't pray with words. His lips quivered, but no sound escaped. Instead, his offering was fear, raw and ancient, as he carved symbols into the tablet's surface. Somewhere beyond the veil of the visible world, unseen eyes watched. The gods were not kind. They were not gentle. They were hungry, powerful, and unpredictable. Each breath of wind, each clap of thunder, each tremor in the earth's bones spoke of their moods. It was not love that bound humanity to the gods, but terror and awe. And so, the first stories were not written for comfort but for survival. When the rivers flooded, leaving destruction in their wake, it was not mere chance. The people whispered the name of Enlil, the Lord of Storms, and trembled. Had they angered him? Had their offerings been too small? The Sumerians looked to the sky and saw not emptiness but dominion. Anu, the king of the heavens, sat above them, silent but watchful. He was not a god who touched the earth, he commanded it from afar. Yet, there was Enki, the god who loved the water, the one who shaped man from clay and gifted them the tools to build cities. He was the protector who whispered secrets to humanity, the sly and clever one who defied his peers to save mankind from destruction. But even Enki's mercy carried weight. To serve the gods meant endless labor, endless worship, endless fear of punishment. The Akkadians inherited this fear. Their warriors carried not only spears but prayers, for every battle was waged under the shadow of Ishtar. She was both beauty and death, her love a blessing and her rage a curse. Men offered blood and psalm at her altars, hoping to find favor, hoping to avoid her fury. The gods were not distant beings. They walked in dreams. They spoke through fire. They demanded sacrifices and returned only glimpses of mercy. Babylon rose from these whispers of divine hunger. Marduk claimed the heavens by splitting the body of Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. Her blood ran into the rivers, and her bones formed the earth. The world itself was born from violence, and the gods expected no less from their children. Power belonged to those who pleased them, and cities rose like towers of defiance against the chaos that waited outside their walls. The priests walked the corridors of temples, their footsteps echoing against polished stone. Incense curled toward the heavens, carrying prayers to gods who never answered directly. Instead, the gods sent signs, storms, eclipses, sicknesses. Omens hung in the air like poison, and kings sought priests not for guidance but for survival. A wrong word, a wrong sacrifice, and entire dynasties fell. In Assyria, the gods became weapons. Ashur's name rang out in battle cries, and his image adorned banners drenched in blood. The gods no longer waited in temples, they marched alongside armies, their will carved into the bones of conquered nations. Fear of divine wrath turned enemies into slaves, and monuments rose to honor victories that felt hollow under the weight of endless war. Even in triumph, there was unease. The gods were fickle, and their favor could vanish as quickly as a shadow in firelight. This fear built ziggurats, mountains of brick that reached toward the skies, desperate attempts to pull the gods closer. But the gods remained untouchable, their voices hidden in thunder and wind. Somewhere between terror and worship, love and fear, mankind knelt. They molded statues, painted eyes wide with wonder and dread. They spilled wine and blood, hoping to please beings they could not see but dared not ignore. And when the earth trembled or the rivers raged, they didn't run. They looked upward, tears mixing with rain, and begged for mercy. Yet mercy was fleeting. The gods loved drama, spectacles of sacrifice and displays of devotion. And the people gave it to them, building temples where echoes of chants lingered long after voices had gone silent. The gods did not die when cities fell. They lingered in ruins, their names whispered by scavengers and sung by the wind. But power, even divine power, is never secure. The gods knew this, and so did their worshippers. The clay tablets and carvings tell stories of feasts and famines, victories and plagues. Each tale is a prayer, a plea for favor, a cry for protection. The echoes of those prayers still linger, hidden in broken tablets and sun-baked ruins. Somewhere beneath the layers of time and dust, the gods wait. And the earth still trembles when their names are spoken. The sky was not empty. It stretched like a vast, endless sea above the earth, and beyond it, the gods stirred. Before the rivers carved their paths, before the mountains dared to rise, there was only chaos, a swirling, restless void. Darkness ruled, heavy and suffocating, and from that darkness came the first whispers of existence. In the beginning, there were two forces, locked together like lovers who could not bear to part, Apsu, the sweet, life-giving water, and Tiamat, the bitter saltwater sea. They pressed against one another, cradling the seeds of creation in their depths, but nothing stirred. Nothing lived. And then, something changed. From their union, the first gods were born, fragile and full of hunger. They broke the silence with laughter and song, their voices rippling through the waters. But their noise stirred anger in Apsu, who longed for peace, for the stillness of the void. He plotted to silence his children, to drown their defiant voices before they could grow too strong. Yet, the gods had learned to fight. Ea, the clever one, struck first. With spells whispered in the dark, he cast Apsu into eternal sleep and claimed his throne. The sweet waters became his domain, and from them, he shaped the foundations of the earth. But Tiamat, left to grieve alone, seethed. Her sorrow curdled into rage, and from her fury, she birthed monsters, dragons with fangs of iron and venom that scorched the earth. She swore to reclaim what had been stolen. The heavens trembled at her approach, and the young gods cowered before her wrath. But one among them did not kneel. Marduk, the son of Ea, stood tall, his heart steady. He promised to end Tiamat's reign if the gods would grant him their power, their loyalty, and their fear. With the winds at his back and a net woven from storms, Marduk faced the dragon. The battle shook the heavens. Lightning flashed, and thunder rolled as Marduk's net trapped Tiamat, but she thrashed and roared, her fury threatening to shatter the skies. He drew his bow and loosed an arrow straight into her heart. Silence fell. From her broken body, Marduk shaped the world. Her ribs became the vault of the sky, her eyes the sources of the rivers, and her tail the arc of the horizon. He stretched her skin to form the earth, her blood seeping into its veins, giving life to the soil. But creation was not enough. Marduk hung the stars as lamps to watch over the night, and he ordered the moon and sun to mark time. Still, the gods hungered. They demanded servants, beings to tend their temples and feed their altars. So Marduk turned to Kingu, Tiamat's lover and conspirator, and spilled his blood upon the clay. From that crimson mud, mankind was born. Their purpose was clear. They would labor for the gods, building ziggurats that pierced the skies and singing hymns that echoed through the heavens. They were bound by blood to their creators, eternally tethered to the whims of forces far beyond their understanding. And so the world stood, a masterpiece carved from chaos, a balance of order and destruction. But the earth never forgot its violent birth. The rivers still carried whispers of Tiamat's rage, and the storms echoed with the cries of gods locked in unseen battles. The heavens hung heavy, layered like a great canopy, each level guarded by divine beings. The gods moved unseen, their footsteps shaking the ground, their shadows stretching across the land. Below, the earth stood firm, yet fragile, resting upon the watery abyss of Apsu. And beneath it all, the underworld waited, a place of darkness where souls wandered without end, their voices lost in endless echoes. The people looked upward and saw not freedom but a cage, its bars woven from stars and clouds. Life was brief, fragile, and the gods demanded obedience. But the earth itself carried their stories, carved into tablets and stones, whispered through winds and floods. The people lived with this tension, caught between gratitude and fear. For creation had not been a gift, it had been a victory. And victories could be undone. The gods had shaped the world from chaos, but chaos still lingered, pressing against the edges of creation, waiting for cracks to form. And the cracks always came. The air inside the temple was thick with the scent of burning incense, sweet, smoky, and ancient. Golden light from flickering oil lamps danced across walls carved with scenes of gods in triumph and men in supplication. Outside, the ziggurat towered above the city like a stairway to the heavens, its massive tiers reaching skyward, daring to touch the domain of the divine. The people stood below, their heads bowed, their hands lifted with trembling reverence. They were not equals here. They were servants, shadows in the presence of forces too vast to comprehend. The gods did not live among men, they demanded that men come to them. And so, they built mountains of brick and clay, each stone carried as an offering, each step climbed as an act of surrender. It was not enough to pray. The gods needed to see, to hear, to taste devotion. At the heart of the temple, priests moved like shadows, their footsteps muted by layers of fine linen robes. Their hands, stained with the blood of countless sacrifices, were steady. This was no ordinary service. It was survival. On the altar, the goat's eyes were wide, reflecting the flickering firelight. It did not struggle. Perhaps it understood its purpose. The blade came swiftly, and the priest's lips moved in hushed tones as the blood spilled into the sacred basin. It was not cruelty. It was balance, life offered to sustain life. The gods hungered, and men fed them. But the rituals were not only of blood. Priests prepared meals, bread, honey, beer, and roasted meats, placing them before the idols in elaborate displays. The gods did not eat these offerings, but their spirits consumed the essence. The food was later shared among the temple workers, a silent reminder that even in worship, the gods controlled survival. To the outside world, priests were more than servants of the gods. They were keepers of secrets, interpreters of omens, and wielders of divine authority. They read the movements of stars, traced patterns in the entrails of animals, and watched flames for signs of the gods' moods. Every flicker, every shadow carried meaning, and their interpretations could shape the fate of kings and empires. The ziggurats were more than buildings, they were ladders connecting earth and heaven. At the top, the god's chamber waited, hidden from ordinary eyes. Only the high priest dared enter, bearing the prayers and fears of the people. Inside, he faced the god's statue, carved with precision and dressed in garments finer than any mortal could wear. Eyes inlaid with lapis lazuli stared back at him, unblinking, eternal. But these statues were not mere symbols. Priests treated them as living beings. They bathed them, clothed them, and anointed them with oils. They sang to them, whispered to them, and feared them. At night, the gods were said to leave their statues, walking unseen among the people, their presence felt in the shifting winds and sudden silences. The people knew this and kept their fires lit, their doors locked, and their prayers constant. Even the smallest lapse could bring disaster, a drought, a plague, or the sudden collapse of a mighty city. The gods were not merciful. They were powerful, unpredictable, and jealous. During festivals, the city pulsed with life. Musicians filled the air with rhythms that echoed through the streets, and dancers moved in frenzied devotion. Statues of the gods were paraded on platforms, carried by sweating men who dared not falter. Flowers and perfumes lined the roads, and the crowd erupted in chants that seemed to shake the very ground. But even in celebration, there was fear. The gods watched, and they judged. Their favor could turn to wrath with the smallest mistake, and the priests knew this better than anyone. Every word spoken in prayer, every motion made in ritual, had to be precise. A single misstep could bring ruin. Beneath the splendor, the priests carried a weight that could not be seen. They were not free. Their lives were bound to rituals that stretched back through generations, rituals that could not change, even as kingdoms fell and new ones rose. They lived between worlds, never fully belonging to the earth or the heavens. And still, the people came. They climbed the steps of the ziggurat, their knees aching, their voices raw from chanting. They pressed offerings into the hands of the priests, coins and grain and jewels, hoping it would be enough. Enough to keep the rivers from flooding. Enough to keep the harvest from failing. Enough to keep death from knocking at their doors. The gods did not answer directly. The smoke rose, the blood spilled, and the prayers faded into the night. But the people kept coming, their faith carved as deeply into their bones as the bricks that built the ziggurats. And the priests remained, guardians of rituals older than memory, their shadows stretching long in the lamplight. Somewhere in the heavens, the gods watched. And somewhere in the earth, the people waited. The heavens were never quiet. They pulsed with power, voices layered like thunder rolling across endless skies. To mortal ears, it was chaos, a symphony too vast to comprehend. But to the gods, it was order. Each voice had its place, each name carried weight, and every god knew their rank in the unshakable hierarchy that governed both heaven and earth. At the top stood Anu, the father of the skies. His name was spoken in whispers, his presence too vast for human minds to grasp. He did not walk among mortals. He reigned from the highest heavens, where stars obeyed his will and kings trembled at his name. Anu did not concern himself with petty disputes or mortal prayers. He was the source, the breath that gave life to gods and men alike. But even the heavens needed guardians, and Enlil rose to command them. Enlil was the storm, the wind that bent trees and swept cities into dust. His voice carried the weight of laws, and his anger could drown armies beneath raging floods. Kings knelt before him, their crowns trembling, for Enlil was both protector and destroyer. It was said his mere presence could drive men to madness, yet his favor could raise empires from nothing. Beneath him stood Ea, the god of wisdom and water. He moved silently, his hands shaping rivers and filling the earth with secrets. Ea did not roar like Enlil or loom like Anu. He whispered. He plotted. It was his cunning that protected the gods when chaos threatened, and it was his spells that bound creation to order. Men feared him less, but they trusted him more, offering their prayers when floods came too soon or drought stretched too long. And then there was Marduk, the god who rose from shadows to claim a throne built from victory. He was not born to rule, but earned it through blood and fire. It was Marduk who faced Tiamat when the heavens trembled, who carved the world from her corpse and hung stars in the sky. The younger gods rallied behind him, chanting his name until even the oldest deities bowed. Marduk became the king of gods, yet his rule was always shadowed by the memory of what it took to claim it. The goddesses held power that burned as fiercely as their male counterparts. Ishtar, queen of love and war, moved like fire through the heavens. Men built altars to her beauty, but they feared her temper. She was the goddess who could bless a womb or shatter a city, her love as dangerous as her wrath. No man owned her, and no god could tame her. She stood alone, radiant and unyielding, draped in gold and blood. Below her, Ereshkigal ruled the underworld. She was silent, her gaze colder than the grave she guarded. Souls descended into her domain and never returned. Even the gods avoided her shadow, for Ereshkigal did not bargain or forgive. She kept what was hers. The pantheon stretched far beyond these names. Gods of the sun and moon, Shamash and Sin, guided the skies and watched over justice and time. Nergal carried death on his shoulders, his presence spreading pestilence and fear. Ninurta stood as the warrior, his weapons sharp, his heart unyielding. Dumuzi, the shepherd god, brought fertility and life, but even he was not spared the cruelty of the divine order. Their ranks were fixed, but their alliances were not. The gods fought, betrayed, and punished one another, their rivalries rippling through the heavens and into the mortal world. Kings claimed divine favor, priests prayed to keep the peace, and armies marched beneath banners bearing sacred symbols. Yet even the most faithful knew the gods' tempers could shift without warning. Worship followed this structure. Anu received the first prayers, his name etched into tablets as the highest authority. Enlil's temples stood at the heart of cities, towering monuments to power and obedience. Ea's priests guarded secrets, mixing potions and reciting spells, their rituals hidden behind veils. Marduk's statues gleamed in Babylon, his victories carved into stone, a reminder that gods rose through strength, not birthright. Ishtar's shrines overflowed with offerings, perfumes, jewels, and the blood of animals, and her priestesses danced through the night, their chants rising like flames. In the underworld, Ereshkigal waited without prayers or temples. She needed no offerings. The dead came to her without fail. But the gods were not equal, and neither were their followers. The powerful built temples of gold and lapis lazuli, their voices rising in song, while the poor left crumbs and whispered prayers, hoping the gods would hear them. And when they were not heard, they trembled. The pantheon was not a family, it was a kingdom. And like all kingdoms, it hung by threads of fear and loyalty, bound together by rituals and blood. Each god ruled their domain, yet none stood untouchable. Chaos lingered at the edges of creation, pressing closer with each forgotten offering and broken vow. The people knelt, their voices blending into one, not out of love but survival. The gods heard them, but they did not answer. Instead, the heavens rumbled, and the earth trembled, and the people knew their place. The flames danced in the night, casting flickering shadows against mud brick walls. A storyteller's voice rose above the crackle of the fire, weaving words that clung to the air like smoke. Children huddled close, wide-eyed and silent, while elders nodded, their faces lined with the weight of memory. It wasn't just a story. It was truth, carved into the bones of their ancestors. Every word carried meaning. Every tale warned, promised, or reminded them of who they were and who they must never become. The gods were not distant beings, unreachable and pure. They were flawed, like men, and their flaws were lessons. Enlil, the storm god, once sent a flood to wash away humanity's sins. He drowned the world without mercy, sparing only one man, Utnapishtim, because he listened when the gods whispered. The floodwaters came not because men were weak, but because they were arrogant. They forgot their place. They defied the divine order. And so, the flood reminded them that even kings could drown. This story lingered in every household, an echo that shaped laws and customs. It wasn't just about survival, it was about obedience. The flood taught fear, but it also taught humility. When rulers grew proud, priests reminded them of Enlil's wrath. When farmers looked to the skies for rain, they remembered the price of neglecting offerings. Fear wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The gods themselves mirrored human struggles. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, burned with passion and fury. She loved fiercely but destroyed without hesitation. Her stories taught that love was never gentle. It demanded sacrifice and, sometimes, ruin. Men feared her and desired her, and women prayed to her for power they could not claim themselves. Ishtar's rage reminded them that beauty could be cruel, and desire could turn deadly. When kings failed to protect their people, they looked to Gilgamesh, a man who defied death and gods alike. He was flawed, selfish, and reckless, yet he also sought immortality and mourned the loss of his friend, Enkidu, with a grief so raw it bled through time. Gilgamesh's journey spoke to every man who feared death and every ruler who doubted his worth. It reminded them that even kings were mortal, and the search for meaning mattered more than the search for power. Justice hung in the balance of the gods. Shamash, the sun god, was the giver of light and judgment. His laws governed right and wrong, binding kings and commoners alike. Hammurabi's code, carved into stone, bore Shamash's name as the ultimate source of justice. The laws punished thieves, protected the weak, and demanded fairness, but they also revealed the harsh truths of survival. Eyes for eyes, teeth for teeth, vengeance was justice, and mercy was rare. But there were softer lessons, too. Dumuzi, the shepherd god, embodied life and fertility. His love for Inanna, the queen of heaven, painted the earth in blooms and green fields. Yet even he could not escape the cycle of life and death. When he was dragged to the underworld, the earth withered. His story reminded farmers that harvests could fail, but renewal always followed loss. It was hope wrapped in grief, a promise that even death was not the end. Women listened to the tale of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and learned that strength could come from silence. She ruled the dead without kindness or cruelty, her power rooted not in beauty or love, but in inevitability. She did not need approval or praise. She took what was hers and kept it. For women bound by rules and expectations, Ereshkigal's story was both terrifying and liberating. The gods argued, betrayed, and punished each other, their stories echoing the struggles of families, rulers, and enemies. Marduk's rise to power through the slaying of Tiamat, the chaos serpent, spoke of order triumphing over chaos, but it also whispered darker truths. Marduk's victory came at a price. He killed his own ancestors, spilling divine blood to forge the world. Creation was never clean. It was violent, and the gods were no strangers to sacrifice. These myths weren't just entertainment. They were warnings dressed as wonder, mirrors held up to mortal eyes. They reminded listeners that power was fragile, that love burned as easily as it healed, and that even the gods bled. When a man betrayed his brother, he saw Cain in his reflection, cursed to wander forever. When a woman wept for her lost child, she felt Inanna's grief for Dumuzi and prayed for the strength to endure. The stories didn't end when the fire died down. They lingered, shaping laws, prayers, and punishments. To steal was to risk the wrath of Nergal, god of death. To lie was to insult Shamash, the all-seeing judge. To challenge the gods was to invite destruction, as kings and empires learned when they fell to enemies and floods. And yet, the myths also whispered hope. They promised that love could conquer death, that wisdom could outweak fate, and that prayers might soften even the cruelest gods. Mortals feared the heavens, but they also clung to them, building temples and offering sacrifices, hoping their stories might one day be retold as lessons and not warnings. As the storyteller's voice faded, the fire crackled, and the children's eyes stayed fixed on the embers. The gods were not gone. They watched. They listened. And somewhere in the darkness, they waited for the next prayer, the next offering, the next story. The wind howled across the empty void, and the waters churned in endless motion. Before there was earth, sky, or the warmth of fire, there was Tiamat, boundless, eternal, and fierce. She was the mother of all things and the chaos that came before order. Her waters cradled the first whispers of creation, yet they also held the power to drown it. She was not gentle. She was not kind. She was the storm that gave life and threatened to take it back. In the beginning, there was no division between sky and sea. Tiamat, the primordial goddess of saltwater, and Apsu, the god of freshwater, mingled their currents to birth the first gods. They rose from her depths, young and full of ambition. But ambition is dangerous, and Tiamat felt it. She felt their hunger to rule, their restless need to carve order out of her boundless chaos. The first tremors of betrayal stirred in the deep. The younger gods grew bold, whispering rebellion against their parents. They disturbed the quiet rhythm of the waters, stirring unrest. Apsu, weary of their noise, sought to destroy them. He turned to Tiamat, pleading with her to silence the children they had birthed. But Tiamat hesitated. She was chaos, but she was also creation. To destroy what she had made was to betray her purpose. Yet her hesitation would cost her everything. Ea, the god of wisdom, learned of Apsu's plan and acted first. With spells and cunning, he struck down the father of creation, leaving Tiamat alone. Alone with grief. Alone with rage. The waters that had once cradled life now foamed with fury. Her sorrow turned to vengeance, and from her depths she called forth monsters. Dragons with scales of fire and wings of smoke rose from her body. Serpents with poison dripping from their fangs and storms crackling in their eyes obeyed her command. They swarmed at her side, beasts of chaos born to tear apart the world her children had dared to shape. At the head of her army stood Kingu, her new consort, his chest heavy with the tablet of destinies, the symbol of divine power. She crowned him with the authority to rule, but it was her rage that drove them forward. The younger gods trembled. They saw the storm rise and felt the earth quake beneath Tiamat's wrath. None dared to face her until Marduk, son of Ea, stepped forward. He was young but bold, and his voice rang out like thunder. He would fight the dragon. He would face chaos itself. But he demanded the price of victory. If he defeated her, he would reign as king of the gods. They agreed. Desperation left them no choice. Marduk prepared his weapons, a net to ensnare her, arrows that would pierce her scales, and the winds of the four corners to trap her breath. With fire in his eyes, he met Tiamat in battle. The sea writhed as her serpents struck. The skies burned as her dragons roared. But Marduk's winds filled her mouth, holding it open as she struggled. The net caught her limbs, and the arrow found its mark. It pierced her heart. The sea goddess, vast and terrible, fell. Her blood mixed with the waters, and her body broke apart. But Tiamat's defeat was not the end. It was the beginning. Marduk split her corpse, lifting half of it to form the heavens and pressing the other half down to create the earth. Her ribs became the vault of the sky. Her eyes poured forth rivers, and her body gave shape to mountains. Even in death, Tiamat gave life. Yet her presence lingered. Her monsters were scattered but not destroyed. The Tablet of Destinies, once worn by Kingu, passed to the victor, but its power came at a cost. The gods could claim order, but they could never erase the chaos that birthed it. Tiamat's waters would always lie beneath the earth, seeping through cracks and calling to those who dared to disturb them. Some whispered that her spirit slept in the depths, dreaming of the day when the seas would rise and drown the world again. Others feared that her monsters still prowled the edges of creation, waiting for her call. But all knew this: Tiamat was not gone. She was chaos. She was the storm. And the storm cannot die. Even the gods walked carefully, leaving offerings at the edges of rivers and lakes, fearing the hunger of the waters. Mothers warned their children never to swim too far, never to look too long into the waves, lest Tiamat's voice call them home. Fishermen prayed before casting their nets, their hands trembling as they asked for mercy. And in the hearts of kings, her story lingered, a reminder that no throne was safe, no power unchallenged. Order could rise, but chaos would always wait. Hidden. Watching. Rising like a tide that no wall could hold back. Beneath the earth, where light could never reach, the waters of Apsu stretched endlessly. Silent. Still. Patient. He was the abyss, the ancient force that existed before gods had names, before life had shape. In his depths, the world slept, unborn and unformed, waiting for the first breath to stir. He was the father of creation, but his patience was not infinite. When the gods awoke within his waters, their laughter rippled through the abyss. Apsu listened. At first, he endured. Their voices danced like sunlight on the surface of a river, but soon their noise grew louder. It shattered the silence he had cradled for eternity. The gods played, fought, and plotted, their ambitions churning the calm. Apsu's stillness cracked, and unease seeped in. He turned to Tiamat, the mother of chaos, his partner in creation. She held the gods in her depths, but her heart softened toward them. They were wild, yes, but they were her children. She saw beauty in their noise. Apsu did not. To him, their restlessness was a threat, a storm brewing within his perfect stillness. His voice rumbled through the waters, heavy and slow. They must be silenced. But Tiamat hesitated. Love tangled her thoughts, but Apsu felt no such bonds. Creation was never his purpose, he had cradled life only because it slept. Now it stirred, restless and hungry, and he could no longer bear it. The abyss does not bend, it consumes. Ea, god of wisdom and trickery, sensed the danger. He listened to the whispers of the waters and knew the abyss had turned against its own offspring. Apsu's silence was breaking, and when it broke, it would drown them all. There was no time for hesitation. Ea acted swiftly. He whispered spells older than the gods themselves, weaving barriers of power that even the abyss could not breach. The magic crept through the water like a serpent, binding Apsu before he could rise. But still, Apsu fought. The waters raged, crashing against the invisible walls, but Ea's power held firm. The abyss roared, its depths shaking, but the god of wisdom struck first. With incantations sharp as daggers, he tore through Apsu's stillness, shattering him. The abyss, once endless and eternal, collapsed. Apsu's body became the bedrock of creation. His waters, once pure and free, were chained to the earth, rivers and streams, bound to flow where the gods commanded. Yet his presence lingered. The abyss could not be erased. Ea built his temple atop Apsu's ruins, naming it the Abzu, the holy sanctuary that straddled the worlds above and below. It was a triumph, but the gods knew the price of victory. Apsu's silence was broken, but his anger seeped into the earth, into the waters. Even as the rivers flowed, they whispered his name. Even as wells brought life, they carried his memory. The abyss was never gone, it only waited, buried beneath the earth, biding its time. Tiamat mourned him, but her grief twisted into fury. She had loved the stillness he offered, the calm that held the world before it was born. Now, she saw the gods' betrayal not just as a wound to her, but as an offense against the very foundation of creation. She would rise in his name. She would strike back with monsters born from her rage. But the gods feared more than Tiamat's wrath. They feared the waters. They feared what might seep through the cracks, what might rise from the earth if the abyss ever stirred again. Wells were guarded with prayers. Springs were marked with offerings. Even the bravest priests dared not linger too long at the water's edge. It was said that Apsu's voice still echoed in the depths, calling to those who dared to listen. Some claimed his spirit roamed the rivers, unseen but felt in the currents that pulled too strong, in the waters that drowned without warning. Others whispered that the abyss was not dead, only dreaming. And what is the abyss, if not patience? Waiting, quiet, endless. Even the gods could not forget that the waters which gave life could take it back. The abyss had been chained, but chains could rust. Spells could weaken. And the silence that followed his fall would never be enough to drown his memory. In the dim glow of the earliest days, before the earth was shaped and the skies were stretched, there lingered a presence, silent, subtle, and unseen. Mummu. He drifted between the mighty Apsu and the chaotic Tiamat, a shadow in their vastness, a whisper in the currents. Where they roared, he hummed. Where they commanded, he suggested. Yet, without him, creation's breath might never have stirred. Mummu was not born to rule. He was no warrior god, no towering force to split mountains or tame seas. Instead, he was the mist, the breath of life that filled the spaces between. The primordial architect. The soft voice of inspiration. The unseen hand shaping the dreams of the mighty. He lingered in the background, watching, crafting, waiting. He was Apsu's confidant, trusted above all others. When the gods began to stir and shout, breaking the calm of the abyss, it was Mummu who stood beside Apsu, his voice like rippling water. Their noise disturbs the balance, he murmured. Order must be restored. But his words carried no weight against Ea's cunning and spells. When Apsu resolved to silence the younger gods, Mummu stood at his side, loyal but uncertain. He saw the currents shifting, sensed the danger creeping toward them, but he could not stop it. The gods of ambition and fire moved faster than mist. Before he could shape a defense, Ea's magic wrapped around him. Bound by spells, Mummu was dragged into captivity alongside Apsu, his voice snuffed out like a dying ember. Yet, even in chains, his mind spun. He was no destroyer, no god of vengeance or wrath. He was a builder. A maker. While others battled with force, Mummu worked with thought. The gods stripped him of his place beside Apsu, but they did not strip him of his craft. They feared his whispers but craved his creations. They bound him to their service, turning him from a counselor to a craftsman. No longer free, he poured his skill into forging the tools of their rule, amulets of power, vessels to hold offerings, and sacred tablets etched with divine law. But gods are greedy. They asked for more, greater wonders, stronger barriers, sharper weapons. Mummu obeyed, his hands steady even as bitterness crept into his heart. He became the smith of their desires, but each tool he crafted bore the weight of his resentment. They whispered that his mist lingered in the temples, that the incense burning on altars carried his breath. Priests prayed to mighty gods, but it was Mumu's work they trusted to hold the heavens steady and keep the waters in place. He was in the locks on the doors of holy chambers, and the seals pressed onto scrolls, and the edges of sacred knives. Yet, no prayers called his name. No offerings were made in his honor. He remained unseen, drifting through the works of others, always present but never worshipped. Some say he waited, shaping plans within the mist. Others claimed he faded, his essence dissolving into the air that filled the temples. But a few believed he never left, that his craft endured, silent, patient, and eternal. The gods who chained him feared what might come if the mist gathered again. For Mumu's tools had shaped their world, but tools in the wrong hands could destroy it. And perhaps the mist was not bound after all, perhaps it only swirled, unseen, waiting for the cracks to form, waiting for the chance to seep back through. It was said that in moments of stillness, when the fog hung low over rivers and streets, one might feel the faintest breath of Mumu. Not a voice. Not a presence. Just a stirring, a sense that the world could be reshaped, reforged, if only one dared to reach into the mist and grasp it. In the stillness before time counted its days, there was a moment when the heavens leaned down to kiss the earth. And from that meeting, neither violent nor gentle, came Anshar and Kishar, the eternal boundary where sky meets soil, where the infinite touches the grounded. They were not born from chaos like Tiamat, nor shaped by cunning like Ea. Instead, they emerged as balance itself, the horizon stretched endlessly between above and below. Anshar, the lord of the skies, gazed upward, his presence vast and unyielding. His breath filled the heavens, and his voice carried with the winds. He held the stars in his arms and the storms in his throat. Yet he was not restless like younger gods. Anshar did not chase or conquer. He waited, watching, endless as the vault of heaven. Kishar, his counterpart, rested below, her arms open to the weight of the earth. Her body stretched in fertile fields and sunlit plains, but her spirit ran deeper. She cradled the roots of trees and the veins of rivers, her stillness anchoring the world while Anshar stretched it outward. Where they met, the horizon was sacred. It was a place of promise and tension, a threshold where dreams lifted toward the skies but always remembered their birth in the soil. For the ancients, it was more than just a line in the distance. It was a bridge between realms, a seam holding heaven and earth together. But even gods of balance were not spared the weight of divine schemes. Their union gave rise to children, great powers destined to challenge the peace they embodied. Among their offspring was Anu, the god of the heavens, who would rise to rule, and Ea, the cunning one, who would shatter the stillness of the abyss. And so Anshar and Kishar stood, witnesses to the churning of creation. They saw the tides of chaos and order battle beneath them. They felt the ripples of Apsu's fall and Tiamat's fury. Yet they did not move. They could not. To move would be to break the horizon, to shatter the delicate thread between heaven and earth. Priests lifted their hands to the skies in prayers to Anshar and laid their offerings upon the soil for Kishar. Farmers carved their names into fields, trusting Kishar's breath to nourish the crops, while sailors called upon Anshar to steady the winds. Every journey began and ended with a prayer to the horizon gods, for they were the keepers of thresholds, beginnings and endings, departures and returns. But the horizon was also a mystery, a boundary no mortal could cross. For all their prayers, men feared that Anshar and Kishar guarded more than balance, they guarded secrets. The edge of the earth was their dominion, and what lay beyond it was veiled in shadow. Some whispered that Anshar's stars mapped the destinies of men, etched into the sky where only he could see. Others believed Kishar buried forgotten truths in the earth, her roots clutching them tightly, keeping them hidden. There were rumors that their meeting point was not just symbolic, but real, a gateway where gods and men could cross between worlds, if only they dared to step too close. And there were those who claimed to have seen it. Travelers returning from distant lands spoke of places where the sky bent low, where the earth rose high, and the two seemed to touch. They spoke of voices carried on the wind and shadows dancing on the horizon, always just out of reach. But the horizon could not be touched. It was always farther, always beyond. And so the gods remained, locked in their eternal embrace, watching as the world they balanced shifted and changed. Yet, even the heavens grow heavy, and even the earth trembles. And should the horizon crack, should Anshar's skies shatter or Kishir's soil split, what then? Would the balance hold, or would the heavens fall to crush the earth beneath them? The priests never dared to ask. Instead, they bowed their heads and prayed that the horizon would stretch on forever, unbroken, endless, safe. But those who stood at the edge of the world, gazing into the unknown, felt the pull. The horizon was not a wall. It was a door. And the gods who guarded it might not keep it closed forever. In the silence that followed the chaos of swirling waters, the earth began to rise. It rose not with fury, but with a gentle hum, like a heartbeat stirring beneath the surface. From this trembling earth came Lamu and Lahamu, twins born of the mud and foam, guardians of the first land. They emerged as if sculpted by the hands of the gods, their forms sturdy yet fluid, shaped by the same forces that pulled earth from water. Their bodies were wrapped in symbols of strength, woven beards like tangled roots and hair that rippled like waves. But their eyes held something softer, something unspoken, a promise of protection. Lamu and Lahamu were not conquerors. They did not wield thunder or tear the skies apart. Instead, they stood as sentinels, their feet planted firmly in the earth, anchoring creation. Where others ruled by storm and fire, the twins guarded with stillness, their presence a boundary against the chaos that lingered beyond. Their arrival brought calm. The waters that once raged grew quiet, and the land began to take shape around them, mountains rising in the distance, rivers carving paths, and forests spreading their roots. It was said that Lamu and Lahamu pressed their hands into the soil, leaving fingerprints that became valleys and hills. But protection comes at a cost. The twins stood as shields, knowing that to guard the world was to bear its weight. They felt the pull of chaos beneath their feet, the stirring of Tiamat's fury in the depths, and they knew the earth was never truly still. Yet, they did not falter. Instead, they strengthened their bond, standing side by side, unbroken. Together, they became the foundation upon which the gods could build. Their children would rise to shape the heavens and seas, but Lamu and Lahamu remained tied to the earth, silent and steady. The priests called them the firstborn of stability, carving their likeness into the walls of temples and the seals of kings. Statues of the twins guarded doorways and gates, their eyes ever watchful. Merchants whispered prayers to them before setting out on long journeys, and farmers pressed their seeds into the earth, trusting the twins to hold the soil steady beneath their fields. But their stillness hid a deeper truth. Beneath their calm exteriors, Lamu and Lahamu carried the memory of chaos. They knew the fragility of the land they protected, the thin barrier between creation and destruction. The earth was not unshakable, it was layered with cracks, and the twins bore the weight of holding it together. Some said that Lamu's voice could calm storms, while Lahamu's breath could still earthquakes. Others believed that their strength came from their unity, and if ever they were separated, the earth would break apart, swallowed once more by the waters that gave them birth. Legends grew around their bond. Sailors claimed to see their shadows on the horizon, rising like distant islands to guide their ships. Wanderers spoke of strange, twin-like figures appearing in the wilderness, their footprints leaving patterns that could not be washed away. And there were whispers of a deeper fear, that the twins were not just protectors but prisoners. That their stillness was not peace, but vigilance. That the chaos they guarded against was not gone, only sleeping. The priests never spoke of this openly, but in the dark corners of temples, they carved symbols of chains into the twins' images. Not chains of punishment, but chains of duty, bonds they could not break, even if the earth itself trembled beneath them. And so Lamu and Lahamu remained, silent, patient, eternal. The first to rise from chaos and the last to yield to it. Their strength bound the earth together, but their stillness carried a warning. The land was never truly safe, and neither were its guardians. For in the whispers of the wind and the trembling of the ground, the twins heard echoes of what lay beneath, the waters that had once claimed the world and might one day rise to claim it again. When the heavens first stretched their vast arms across the void, there stood anew, silent, commanding, eternal. He was the sky itself, a boundless canopy that arched over the earth, cradling the stars in its embrace. To the ancients, he was not just a god but a presence, a force too immense to be captured in mortal words. His was the authority that crowned the pantheon, the unseen hand guiding both gods and men. Anu's dominion was not marked by thunderbolts or raging seas. He did not wield chaos like Tiamat or cunning like Ea. Instead, his power was in his steadiness, his unyielding supremacy. He was the final word, the ultimate arbiter. The heavens were his throne, and every star was a jewel in his crown. But the weight of such a throne came with isolation. The higher the heavens, the further they seemed from the earth. Anu's gaze was vast, encompassing all, yet distant. He was a father to the gods, yet his presence was felt more in his absence. When storms raged or wars broke out among the divine, it was not Anu who fought or intervened. He remained above, silent and observing, his authority unchallenged but his hand rarely seen. The gods feared him, not because of wrath, but because of what he represented. To defy Anu was not to risk punishment, it was to go against the order of existence itself. Even the chaos of Tiamat, the primordial sea, had bowed to him. Anu had granted the younger gods their domains, allowing them to carve their places in creation, yet his permission came with an unspoken reminder: all things began with the heavens, and all things answered to them. For the people of Mesopotamia, Anu was the unseen force behind kings and laws. His authority mirrored the celestial order, a reminder that the heavens governed the earth. When rulers ascended their thrones, they did so under Anu's watchful eye, claiming their mandate from the skies. His name was invoked in oaths, his presence woven into the fabric of governance. To break faith with Anu was to risk unraveling the harmony of both gods and men. But even in his silence, Anu's influence was felt. The stars that charted destinies were his, their patterns a reflection of his will. The winds that swept across the plains whispered his name, carrying prayers from earth to sky. His power was not in spectacle but in permanence. While other gods rose and fell, waged wars and forged alliances, Anu remained unshaken, the unmovable center of their world. And yet, there were murmurs, questions whispered in the dark corners of temples and firesides. Could a god so distant truly care for the world beneath him? Was Anu's silence a sign of strength or indifference? Some wondered if he watched at all, or if the heavens had become so vast that even their ruler had lost sight of his creation. These doubts were dangerous, but they carried a shadow of truth. Anu's authority was supreme, but it was also fragile in its distance. While the earth trembled under Enlil's storms or thrived under Ea's rivers, Anu's influence felt intangible, like a dream that faded with the morning light. Still, his name endured, carried on the lips of kings and priests, carved into the stones of temples that reached toward the heavens. For in Anu's vastness was a reminder: the heavens did not need to roar to command respect. Their very presence was enough. And so Anu watched, silent and eternal, the father of the gods and the guardian of the heavens. But even the sky cannot escape the pull of the earth. The gods beneath him schemed and struggled, their ambitions threatening the balance Anu had set. And though he rarely descended from his celestial throne, the question lingered: how long could the heavens remain above the fray? The winds rose without warning, churning the dust into spirals that clawed at the sky. The earth trembled under the weight of something unseen yet undeniable, a presence that did not ask for reverence but demanded it. This was Enlil. He did not descend gently. He arrived with the roar of storms and the crack of thunder, a force that bent the world to its knees. Where Anu ruled the heavens in silence, Enlil reigned over the earth with fury and might. He was not a god of whispers or shadows. His voice was the wind that shattered trees, the breath that swept across fields, leaving life and ruin in its wake. His presence was inescapable, felt in the rising gales, the trembling of the earth, and the suffocating stillness before a storm. Enlil was not born to share power. Even the gods treaded lightly in his path, for his moods were as wild as the winds he commanded. He was a bringer of life, carrying rains that soaked parched lands and filled rivers. But he was also the harbinger of destruction, unleashing floods that swallowed villages and storms that tore down cities. The people feared him, yet they could not turn away. They saw his shadow in every harvest, every drought, every thunderclap that shook their homes. Farmers knelt before him, begging for gentle rains instead of violent torrents. Kings built temples that stretched toward the sky, as if their height could placate his anger. But Enlil was more than storms and winds. He was sovereignty itself, the authority that governed earth just as Anu governed the heavens. The gods obeyed his will, and mortals lived under his laws. He was the giver of kingship, the divine thread that bound rulers to the gods. Without Enlil's blessing, no crown was secure, and no city could stand. His name carried weight. To speak it was to summon the storm, to acknowledge the force that could shape nations or erase them. Yet Enlil's power was not reckless. Beneath the fury of his storms lay purpose, a divine order that punished the arrogant and lifted the humble. But that purpose was not without cost. Enlil's power set him apart, even from the other gods. While they reveled in feasts and alliances, he remained distant, burdened by the responsibility of maintaining balance. He was the hand that punished when creation fell out of line, and the voice that called for mercy when the floodwaters threatened to drown the world. The flood, his greatest act of destruction, was not born from hatred but from despair. The world had become loud, chaotic, its people ungrateful and defiant. Enlil's anger rose like a storm, and he let the waters rise to cleanse the earth. But even in destruction, there was mercy. When one man survived, Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, it was Enlil who granted him immortality, turning devastation into renewal. This duality made Enlil both feared and worshipped. He was not a god who could be ignored or outwitted. His storms reminded mortals of their fragility, yet his rains gave them hope. His wrath shattered walls, but his blessing built empires. And so the people built ziggurats, towering temples that reached toward the sky, hoping to capture his attention and favor. Priests filled these sanctuaries with chants and offerings, their voices rising like prayers carried on the wind. But they knew that Enlil could not be controlled. He was a force that answered to no one, not even the gods. Yet, for all his might, there were whispers of unease. Enlil's power was vast, but so was his loneliness. The winds that carried his voice also carried echoes of longing, a desire for connection that even his storms could not silence. And as the wind swept through the plains and mountains, there was always the question, would Enlil's fury remain tempered, or would the storm rise again? For the earth beneath him was restless, and the skies above him waited. And Enlil, the Lord of Storms, stood between them, unbroken, unyielding, yet never at peace. The waters rippled softly at the edge of the world, a quiet murmur beneath the vast silence of the cosmos. And in that silence, Enki stirred. He was not a god of thunder or storms like Enlil, nor was he a ruler of the heavens like Anu. Enki, also known as Ea, was a god of knowledge, of the unseen forces that shaped the world. He was the quiet whisper in the deep waters, the touch of wisdom that guided humanity from the moment of their creation. He was the keeper of water, the flowing force that nurtured life but could also swallow it whole. His domain stretched beyond the rivers that crisscrossed the land, deeper into the oceans that held secrets the world was not ready to know. In the deep, he had fashioned the first forms of life, and from those waters, he had molded humanity, breathing into them the spark of consciousness, the gift of thought. Enki's gift to humanity was not simply in their creation. It was in the wisdom he gave them, the knowledge that allowed them to build, to dream, to understand the world around them. But Enki's wisdom was not always easy to bear. The floodwaters that had once threatened to drown the earth could also become the floodwaters of knowledge, washing away ignorance and revealing truths that were often uncomfortable, difficult to understand. When the gods decided that humanity had become too noisy, too unruly, it was Enki who stood against them, pleading for the survival of mankind. He had seen their potential, their capacity to learn, to grow, to evolve. It was Enki who instructed Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, to build the great ark, saving mankind from destruction. While the other gods had seen only chaos, Enki had seen the spark of creation that still burned brightly within humanity. But his connection to humanity was not born from pity. Enki's love for them was a quiet, enduring force. He was not a god who ruled with an iron fist, but with gentle guidance, teaching the first priests the art of magic, helping the wise to unlock the secrets of the universe. Where others saw limits, Enki saw possibilities. Where others saw disobedience, Enki saw curiosity, a thirst for understanding. His wisdom was both a blessing and a burden. Mortals sought him out, asking for the secrets of life, of creation, of the divine. They would come to him with questions about fate, about love, about the mysteries that gnawed at the edges of their lives. And Enki, in his infinite knowledge, would give them the answers they sought, but never easily. His wisdom required sacrifice, a willingness to face the unknown, a willingness to venture into the deep waters of the soul. But it was not only wisdom that Enki possessed. It was magic, the ability to shape the world with words, to call forth the elements and bend them to his will. The secrets of magic were woven into the fabric of reality, and Enki had unlocked them long before the first human breath was drawn. He had taught the sages and the priests how to summon the waters, how to read the stars, how to call on the powers that lay hidden beneath the earth. But magic, like wisdom, could be dangerous. Enki had seen its potential to heal, to create, but also to destroy. He had seen the destruction wrought by those who sought power without understanding. The same waters that gave life could also flood entire cities, drowning them in their own ambition. The same wisdom that could elevate a king could also bring him to ruin, should he misuse it. Enki's heart was not without sorrow. His wisdom had shown him that the gift of knowledge came with a price. Humanity, in their desire for greatness, often forgot the balance that Enki had tried to instill in them. They sought power without understanding its cost, wisdom without the humility to bear it. And Enki, the god of waters, watched as they teetered on the edge, sometimes falling into chaos, sometimes rising above it. But still, he loved them. His heart beat for humanity, for their endless capacity to learn, to grow, to change. And though he knew they would stumble, though he knew they would make mistakes, Enki never gave up on them. His wisdom, like the waters, flowed endlessly. He was there to guide them, to help them understand the mysteries of the world, and to remind them that knowledge, like the river, could both nurture and consume. And so, as the waters moved through the world, as humanity grew and learned, Enki watched, ever patient, ever wise. His love for them was quiet but enduring, a force that could not be measured or understood, but one that shaped the very fabric of their existence. The sky shattered as the roar of battle echoed across the heavens, a sound that rang like thunder in the ears of gods and mortals alike. Marduk, the rising star of Babylon, stood firm in the face of chaos. In his eyes burned the fire of determination, in his hands, the sword of fate. Before him, the great Tiamat, the chaos dragon of creation, writhed in fury, her serpentine body coiling with venomous rage. She was the primordial sea, the darkness before the light, a force that could unmake the very world itself. But Marduk was not afraid. He had been chosen by the gods, and in his heart, he knew that the fate of all creation rested upon his shoulders. The gods had given him their trust, their power, and now it was his turn to prove that he was worthy of their faith. With a single, defiant roar, Marduk raised his sword, and the world held its breath. Tiamat struck first, her mouth opening wide to unleash the storm, but Marduk was quicker. His blade met her fury with an unyielding resolve, slashing through the very essence of chaos. The battle raged on, winds howled, the earth trembled, and the heavens themselves seemed to bend in response to their struggle. Tiamat was the embodiment of the old world, the primordial forces that had given birth to the universe. She was untamable, unstoppable, but Marduk, he was the future. And in the end, it was Marduk's will that prevailed. With a final, earth-shattering strike, he cleaved Tiamat in two, her body crashing to the depths of the cosmic ocean. The forces of chaos were no more, and from her broken form, Marduk fashioned the heavens and the earth, the foundations of the world. The gods watched in awe as the universe took shape, the heavens rising from Tiamat's body, the earth solidifying from her blood. Marduk had triumphed, and with his victory came a new era. He was not just the slayer of chaos, he was the king of the gods, the ruler of both heaven and earth. But Marduk's rise was not just about the power of battle, it was about the power of creation. His strength was not solely in his sword, but in his ability to bring order to the universe, to transform the chaos into harmony. Under his reign, the world would be a place of structure, of justice, of balance. Where Tiamat had sought to undo creation, Marduk would build, shaping the very fabric of existence with his wisdom and strength. The people of Babylon saw in Marduk a god who not only wielded power, but also cared for his people. He was their protector, their champion, the one who would guide them through the storms of life. The city of Babylon itself became his sacred domain, and its ziggurat, the Enki, reached toward the heavens as a symbol of his divine authority. In every brick, in every stone, Marduk's power was etched into the very heart of the world. But even as Marduk ascended to the throne of the gods, there were whispers. He was a god of war, yes, but also a god of wisdom. His battles were not simply about defeating enemies, they were about bringing order to the world, about ensuring that the forces of chaos would never again threaten the creation he had worked so hard to establish. In his hands, the sword became a symbol of justice, of the balance between creation and destruction, of the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Marduk's legacy was not just in his victory over Tiamat, but in his ability to bring people together under his reign. As king of the gods, he understood the delicate balance that existed in the universe. He ruled with both strength and wisdom, understanding that a king must protect his people, but also guide them toward greater understanding. The lessons of his battle with Tiamat were not lost on his followers. He had proven that even in the face of overwhelming chaos, one could rise, one could fight, and one could prevail. And so Marduk became the symbol of Babylon itself, strong, resilient, a shining beacon of hope and power. His name echoed in the streets of the city, whispered in the prayers of kings and beggars alike. He was not just a god of victory, he was a god of life, of creation, of renewal. From the ashes of Tiamat's defeat, Marduk had forged a new world, a world where order reigned and the gods watched over their people. But even as Marduk ruled from his throne in the heavens, the battle was not yet over. The forces of chaos were never truly gone, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their moment to return. And Marduk, the king of the gods, would forever stand guard, his sword raised, ready to protect the world he had created, and to ensure that no force, no matter how great, would ever again threaten the fragile peace he had brought to the universe. The air was thick with dust as the Assyrian armies marched across the desert, their boots pounding against the earth in rhythmic unison. At their head rode a figure draped in the finest armor, his face obscured by a fearsome helmet, but his presence unmistakable. Ashur, the warrior god, had always been the soul of the Assyrian military might, and his strength coursed through the veins of every soldier. As they advanced, it was as if the very earth trembled in his wake. To the Assyrians, Ashur was more than a god, he was their protector, their champion, the divine force that guided their every conquest. The Assyrian Empire was a ruthless force, feared by all who dared to oppose it. And at its core stood Ashur, ruthless, unyielding, a god who understood the nature of power. He was the god of war, the one who led his people to victory, who ensured that their enemies would fall before them. His name was synonymous with strength, and his will was carried out by the armies that marched in his name. But Ashur was not just a god of bloodshed, he was the embodiment of divine justice. The Assyrians believed that Ashur granted them victory because they were his chosen people, a people who would spread his divine will across the world. To them, conquest was not just a matter of power, it was a divine mandate. They believed that by expanding their empire, they were fulfilling Ashur's plan for the world, bringing order and justice where there was chaos. It was Ashur's will that guided the Assyrian kings, and they saw themselves as his earthly representatives, charged with bringing his divine rule to all corners of the earth. But Ashur's role was not limited to the battlefield. He was a god of protection, a guardian who watched over the Assyrians and ensured their survival. The mighty cities of Assyria were built in his honor, their walls high and unyielding, fortified with the same strength and resolve that Ashur himself embodied. His temples stood at the heart of every great Assyrian city, towering structures that reached toward the heavens, reminders of his power and protection. The people of Assyria turned to Ashur in their darkest moments, praying for his guidance and strength. In times of war, they sought his favor on the battlefield, offering sacrifices to ensure his protection. And in times of peace, they gave thanks, acknowledging that it was through his divine hand that they had been blessed with prosperity. To the Assyrians, Ashur was not just a god, he was their very identity, the force that bound them together and gave them purpose. Ashur's power was not just in his ability to conquer, it was in his role as a defender of the Assyrian way of life. Under his watchful eye, the Assyrians believed they were invincible, destined to rise above all others. Their cities flourished, their armies grew stronger, and their enemies fell before them. Ashur was the god who made them mighty, who imbued them with the strength to overcome any obstacle. To question Ashur was to question their very existence as a people. But even as the Assyrians basked in the glory of their empire, there was always a reminder of Ashur's power, a reminder that no one, no matter how mighty, could ever escape his judgment. He was not a god who tolerated weakness or hesitation. To earn his favor, one had to be strong, unwavering, and relentless in the pursuit of victory. Ashur's favor was not freely given, it had to be earned through strength and sacrifice. As the Assyrian Empire expanded, so too did Ashur's influence. His image adorned the walls of every palace, every temple, his fierce form immortalized in stone. He was the constant presence, the god who never left his people's side. The Assyrian kings, too, adopted Ashur as their personal god, and their rule was seen as an extension of his divine authority. Every victory they won was seen as a triumph of Ashur's will, and every defeat was a sign of his judgment. But as with all empires, the Assyrian Empire eventually began to falter. The same strength that had built it up now began to erode, as internal strife and external pressure threatened to tear it apart. And as the Assyrians faced their inevitable decline, they turned once more to Ashur. They sought his favor in their final hours, praying for his divine protection as their enemies closed in. But in the end, even Ashur's mighty warriors could not hold back the tide of history. Yet Ashur's legacy endured. He was more than just the god of a lost empire, he was a symbol of the strength and resolve that had once made the Assyrians great. His name echoed through the ages, a reminder of a time when his warriors marched across the earth, unstoppable and divine. In the hearts of those who remembered, Ashur remained a force to be reckoned with, a god who had once stood as the protector of the Assyrians, and, for a time, the master of the world. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden light across the lush fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The earth, rich and fertile, seemed to hum with life, alive in a way that only those who truly understood the connection between nature and divinity could appreciate. It was here, among the hills and rivers of ancient Mesopotamia, that Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, watched over all things. She was the divine embodiment of the earth itself, her spirit woven into the soil, the plants, and the animals that flourished under her gaze. She was the heartbeat of the world, the very breath of life that sustained it. To the people who lived in the shadows of her temples and in the warmth of her blessings, Ninhursag was the mother of all. She was the goddess of fertility, the creator of life, the protector of women, and the guardian of children. Without her, there would be no crops to harvest, no children to nurture, no life to celebrate. Every birth, every growth, every season of renewal was a gift from her. Her power was quiet yet immeasurable, a soft and constant presence that gave form to all that lived. Ninhursag's name was spoken with reverence, a prayer whispered with every new harvest and with every infant's first breath. Her role in the lives of the people was not one of spectacle or thunderous presence. Instead, she was found in the quiet moments, the tender growth of a seed in the earth, the delicate flutter of a newborn's first breath, the gentle rise and fall of a mother's chest as she cradled her child. These were the moments where Ninhursag's power shone brightest, in the simplest, most fundamental acts of creation. She was the pulse of the earth itself, nurturing and life-giving, a goddess who could never be ignored, for her presence was in every living thing. The stories told by the people of Mesopotamia spoke of her as a goddess of nurturing, one who would protect her people from famine and disease, ensuring that the lands stayed fertile and the animals thrived. She was often depicted as a mother, her arms open in a gesture of embrace, welcoming all those who sought her protection. Her temples were places of comfort, filled with the scent of incense and the sounds of quiet prayers. In her sacred groves and holy shrines, people came to seek her blessings, praying for healthy crops and strong children. They knew that her favor meant the difference between prosperity and hardship. The earth itself was her body, each hill, each tree, each river an extension of her divine form. When the crops flourished, the people knew it was Ninhursag who had smiled upon them, showering them with her grace. When the rains came in abundance, they knew it was her tears of joy that watered the land. But when the earth was barren, when crops failed or disease swept through the land, it was a sign that Ninhursag's favor had been withdrawn. The people would fast, they would pray, they would offer sacrifices, hoping to return to the goddess's good graces, knowing that only through her could the earth return to life. The connection between Ninhursag and motherhood was not just metaphorical, it was tangible. Women turned to her when they wished for children, and mothers sought her guidance in raising their sons and daughters. It was said that she was the goddess who eased the pains of childbirth, whose divine touch ensured that mothers and their babies survived the dangerous process of birth. Her compassion for mothers was infinite, and in return, the women of Mesopotamia revered her above all other gods. Their lives were so deeply intertwined with her that they knew that their own survival and prosperity depended on her favor. But Ninhursag was not just a goddess of the natural world. She was a goddess of relationships, of balance, of life's cyclical nature. Her fertility was not just the fertility of the soil, but the fertility of the heart, of the mind, of the community. She brought balance to all things, making sure that life would always regenerate, that death would never have the final say. The seasons turned because of her wool, spring to summer to fall to winter, each one a reflection of the endless cycles of birth, death, and rebirth that governed life itself. The people's love for Ninhursag was deep and abiding. She was not a distant deity to be feared, she was a mother, one who was always there, listening to their pleas, sharing in their joys and sorrows. It was said that when the earth was fertile and the fields abundant, Ninhursag smiled down upon them. When the earth was barren, when hunger gripped the land, she wept. Her emotions were as boundless as the earth itself, and the people knew that her heart was tied to their own. If the people flourished, she flourished. If they suffered, she suffered. The connection between goddess and mortal was unbreakable, and it was in her care that the people found solace, hope, and strength. The legacy of Ninhursag lived on in the rituals that celebrated the changing of the seasons, and the songs sung by mothers as they rocked their children to sleep, and the blessings whispered before every planting and every birth. She was the foundation of life itself, the fertile soil beneath their feet, the steady rhythm of the earth's heartbeat, the nurturing hand that ensured that they would never be left wanting. And in the quiet, fertile earth, Ninhursag's legacy lives on, as eternal as the promise of life itself. The sun began its slow descent over the sprawling plains of ancient Mesopotamia, casting a soft, amber glow over the earth. The air was filled with the scent of grain, an abundance that promised another season of prosperity, of food to sustain the people, of harvests to be celebrated. In the midst of it all, Nisaba, the goddess of writing and grain, watched over the land. She was a figure of quiet power, her influence far-reaching yet subtle, like the steady growth of crops beneath the soil. She was the one who nurtured the seeds of civilization, not just in the fields, but in the minds of men and women who wrote down their stories, their laws, and their dreams. Her role in the pantheon was as essential as the grain that fed the people. Without her, the scribes would have no words to write, and without her, the fields would yield no bounty. Nisaba was the protector of knowledge and agriculture, two of the cornerstones of Mesopotamian society. The scribes, those who recorded the annals of history, the laws, and the stories of the gods, looked to her for guidance. She was the divine muse who inspired the written word, who made it possible for the past to be remembered and for the future to be built on a foundation of understanding. In the ancient temples dedicated to her, the walls were lined with clay tablets, inscribed with the cuneiform script that would carry the wisdom of the ages. These inscriptions told stories of gods and kings, of triumphs and defeats, of love and loss. The scribes, with their styluses in hand, sat in reverence to Nisaba, channeling her wisdom as they etched the sacred words into the clay. Each stroke of the stylus was a prayer, each line of cuneiform a tribute to the goddess who had gifted them with the power of writing. But Nisaba was not only the goddess of knowledge, she was also the goddess of the harvest. She was the one who blessed the fields with an abundance of grain, ensuring that the crops flourished and the people never went hungry. Her power was seen in the thick, golden stalks of wheat that swayed in the breeze, and the weight of the barley that filled the granaries. The people of Mesopotamia understood that the grain they ate, the bread they broke, was a gift from Nisaba. She was the unseen force behind the food that nourished their bodies, just as she was the unseen force behind the knowledge that nourished their minds. To the farmers and cultivators, she was a goddess of immense importance. They would offer her prayers before planting their seeds, asking for her blessing so that the crops would grow strong and plentiful. The grain that filled the granaries was a tangible reminder of her favor. Without it, the people would starve. With it, they could survive even the harshest of seasons. In the festivals dedicated to her, the air would be thick with the scent of fresh-baked bread, the symbol of her nurturing presence. And every loaf and every kernel of grain was a reminder of Nisaba's love and care. The bread was broken and shared in celebration and thanksgiving for the goddess's blessings. Farmers and scribes alike would gather in the temple courtyards, offering their harvests and their scrolls to her, knowing that without her, there would be neither sustenance nor knowledge to pass on. Her role as the goddess of writing was equally vital. She was the divine patron of the scribes, the keepers of history, the ones who recorded the events of their time for future generations. The scribes would invoke her name before they began their work, asking for clarity of thought and precision in their writing. Nisaba was the one who gave them the tools to preserve the knowledge of the past, to create the written record that would define a culture. In the hum of the scribe's work, as the stylus scratched across the clay, there was a sacred rhythm, a connection between the goddess and the act of creation itself. Nisaba's power extended far beyond the fields and the tablets. She was also a guardian of order, a symbol of the structured way in which the universe itself operated. Just as the harvest was cyclical, just as the seasons came and went, so too did knowledge pass from one generation to the next. She was the goddess who ensured that the wisdom of the ancients was not lost to time, that the lessons of the past would be written down and preserved for those who came after. And so, when the people looked to the heavens, when they looked to the earth, they saw her influence everywhere, in the grains that fed them, in the writings that documented their lives, and in the very rhythm of civilization itself. Nisaba was the quiet force that bound them together, the unseen hand that guided their hands as they wrote their stories and sowed their fields. The fields of Mesopotamia were fertile because of her, and the libraries filled with knowledge existed because she had blessed the scribes with the ability to write. It was said that Nisaba's wisdom was limitless, that she could not only shape the crops, but also the very way people thought and understood the world. In her presence, there was clarity. She brought order to the chaos of thought, structure to the seemingly random patterns of nature. She was both the seed and the scribe, the creator of abundance in all its forms. And for the people who lived beneath the sky of Mesopotamia, there was no greater blessing than the one that came from Nisaba's hands. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and growing plants as the sun began to set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the fields. It was a time of transition, the world caught between the fading heat of summer and the cool embrace of autumn. Amidst the changing seasons, the people whispered the name of Dumuzi, the god who embodied the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Dumuzi, or Tammuz as he was known in later times, was a god whose life was intertwined with the very soil of the land. He was the shepherd, the guardian of flocks, the protector of the fields, and above all, the god of vegetation. His existence was a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death, the eternal dance between growth and decay. In the heart of every Mesopotamian farmer, Dumuzi was a symbol of hope, hope that the rains would come, that the crops would thrive, and that the earth would provide once more. His story was one of love and loss, of sacrifice and renewal. Dumuzi was not just a god of the seasons, he was the personification of the cycle of life itself. In the spring and summer, he flourished. The earth bloomed, and so did he, a young, strong god whose vitality was reflected in the fields that flourished under his watch. The grains grew tall, the herds grew fat, and the people rejoiced in the bounty that Dumuzi had blessed them with. He was a symbol of prosperity, a god whose very presence seemed to bring life to everything it touched. But as the days shortened and the temperature began to drop, Dumuzi's vitality began to wane. The earth that had once been vibrant and green grew dry and barren. The herds grew lean, the crops began to wither, and the people feared the coming of the cold. It was during this time that Dumuzi's disappearance from the earth was mourned. His death, a necessary sacrifice for the land to rest, was deeply felt. It was a time of sorrow, but also of understanding. His journey into the underworld was a natural part of the cycle, a reminder that death was not the end, but rather a necessary step in the eternal dance of life. In the stories of Dumuzi's descent into the underworld, there was a reflection of the changing seasons. Just as the earth seemed to die with the onset of winter, so too did Dumuzi retreat into the realm of the dead. But even in death, there was hope. For the god's descent was not permanent. The earth would rest, but it would also regenerate. The fields would sleep, but they would also awaken. The shepherd's flocks would once again graze in the spring, and the crops would return in the warmth of summer. Dumuzi's death was not a loss, but a promise that the cycle would continue, that life would return. The people of Mesopotamia celebrated Dumuzi not only as a god of the harvest, but also as a god of love. His union with the goddess Inanna was a central part of his myth. It was said that Dumuzi was Inanna's lover, and together, they represented the fertile union of the earth and the heavens. Their love was a symbol of the harmony between the natural world and the divine. But their love was also tragic. When Inanna descended into the underworld, it was Dumuzi who took her place, sacrificing himself for her. His death in her stead was an act of love, but also of necessity. It was a sacrifice that ensured the continued cycle of the seasons, the life and death that ruled the land. For the people who lived under the ever-changing sky of Mesopotamia, Dumuzi was a god of both joy and sorrow. His presence brought prosperity, but his absence brought mourning. And yet, even in the darkest days of winter, the people knew that his return was inevitable. The earth would once again bloom, and Dumuzi would rise, bringing with him the promise of new life. The shepherds would lead their flocks to the lush pastures once more, the crops would sprout from the earth, and the people would give thanks for the God who made it all possible. In the temples where Dumuzi was worshipped, offerings of grain, wool, and oil were made in reverence to the god who watched over the fields and the flocks. The people would gather, their voices raised in song, their hearts full of gratitude for the bounty that Dumuzi provided. The rhythms of their lives were deeply connected to his cycle. When he thrived, so did they. When he suffered, so did they. It was a bond that transcended the mortal and divine, a relationship built on the understanding that life, like the seasons, was always in motion, always changing. Dumuzi's story was not just one of a god and his people, it was a reflection of the very world they inhabited. His life and death mirrored the passage of time itself, the ebb and flow of nature, the endless cycle that bound all living things together. He was both the promise of the harvest and the grief of winter, the shepherd who guided his people through both abundance and scarcity. And in the quiet moments, when the first shoots of spring began to push through the soil, the people would remember Dumuzi, not just as a god, but as a symbol of the eternal rhythm of life. The night had fallen gently over the fields, casting a peaceful silence across the land. In the stillness, a soft breeze whispered through the crops, as if the earth itself was breathing. Amidst this tranquility, there was a goddess whose name was quietly spoken, her presence felt in every grain of wheat, every sprouting plant, and every hopeful dream. Inanna, the sister of Dumuzi, held dominion over the fertile soil and the dreams that danced within the hearts of the people. She was the goddess of agriculture, of the cycles of sowing and reaping, and of the quiet strength that sustained life. Where Dumuzi's story was one of life, death, and resurrection, Inanna's was a tale of patience, nurturing, and protection. She stood as a guardian of the earth's fertility, ensuring that the crops would grow, the fields would flourish, and the people would never go hungry. Her love for the land was boundless, as deep as the roots that reached beneath the surface of the earth, intertwining with the very fabric of existence. But Inanna was more than just a goddess of the harvest. She was also the keeper of dreams. When night fell and the stars lit the sky, the people would close their eyes and dream of better days, of abundance and joy, of peace and prosperity. In these dreams, Inanna was there, watching over them, guiding their hopes and desires. She was the one who whispered the dreams of the future, the possibilities that lay just beyond the horizon. Through her, the people found solace in their darkest hours, comfort in their struggles, and hope in the face of uncertainty. As the sister of Dumuzi, Inanna shared in the sorrow of his absence. When her brother descended into the underworld, it was she who mourned, her heart heavy with grief. The land itself seemed to echo her sadness, the fields lying fallow, the crops struggling to grow. But even in her mourning, Inanna did not abandon the earth. She tended to the land with a quiet determination, her nurturing spirit never faltering. Her connection to the earth was unbreakable, and even in the face of loss, she continued to protect the fertility of the soil. Yet Inanna's power was not only in her ability to nurture the earth, it was also in her capacity to heal the hearts of those who turned to her. The people knew that in times of sorrow, when the fields lay barren and the dreams seemed distant, they could turn to Inanna for comfort. Her dreams were not just visions of the future, but dreams of hope, dreams of renewal, and dreams of healing. She held the power to bring peace to troubled hearts, to soothe the pain of loss, and to restore the balance between the heavens and the earth. The stories of Inanna's love for the land were whispered from one generation to the next. They spoke of how she would walk the fields at night, her footsteps light upon the earth, her hands brushing against the crops as she passed. In those moments, it was said that the plants would grow stronger, the fruit would ripen faster, and the earth would hum with the rhythm of her love. She was the quiet guardian of the land, always present, always watching, always caring. But it was her role as the protector of dreams that made Inanna so deeply revered. People would offer their prayers to her, asking for guidance in their dreams, seeking her blessing for good harvests and fruitful endeavors. They would bring her gifts of grain, of the first fruits of the season, and of the sweetest flowers they could find. In return, they asked for the visions of the night to bring them the strength to overcome the challenges of the day. The goddess, in her gentle grace, always listened, always answered. The relationship between Inanna and her people was one built on trust. They trusted her to keep the earth fertile, to watch over the crops, to ensure the well-being of the flocks. And she trusted them to honor the land, to work it with care and respect. Together, they formed a bond that transcended the mortal and the divine, a bond woven together by the rhythms of nature and the dreams of the human heart. When the seasons changed, and the earth began to rest, Inanna's work was far from over. She continued to watch over the land, tending to it in the quiet moments of winter, preparing it for the coming spring. Her presence was felt even in the darkest nights, as the people slept beneath the stars, knowing that her dreams were guiding them. She was the goddess who ensured that when the earth awakened, it would be ready to give life once again. And when the fields grew green again, when the crops began to sprout, when the earth hummed with the sound of life returning, the people would gather to offer their thanks to Inanna. She was the goddess who had given them hope when the world seemed barren, the goddess who had walked with them through both the dark and the light. Her name was spoken with reverence, for they knew that without her, the earth would not be fertile, and their dreams would have no meaning. In the quiet moments, as the stars sparkled overhead, the people would feel the gentle presence of Inanna, watching over them, guiding their hopes and their harvests, weaving the eternal connection between the earth, the sky, and the dreams of those who lived upon it. As the morning sun kissed the earth, its golden light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. In the stillness of this sacred dawn, there was an unseen presence, a force that wove the very fabric of life itself. Utu, the goddess of weaving and fertility, moved with a grace that mirrored the delicate threads she spun, weaving the tapestry of creation with every beat of her heart. Her hands, gentle but powerful, shaped the world in ways unseen. She was the creator of textiles, the nurturer of life, and the embodiment of the rhythm that binds all things together. It was said that from the moment of birth to the moment of death, the threads of existence were carefully crafted by Utu, each strand representing a moment, a memory, a soul. Her weaving was not confined to the simple act of creating cloth. She wove the very essence of life itself, the cycles of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. In her loom, the lives of men and women, animals, and plants were spun together into a harmonious whole. The world, in all its complexity, was but a fabric she wove with love, patience, and care. Utu was more than a goddess of craftsmanship. She was the protector of the home, the keeper of the hearth, and the symbol of all that was nurturing and sustaining. Her weavings were more than just physical, they were spiritual, too. The patterns she created in the fabric of the world reflected the harmony that could be found in the human heart, the balance between love and loss, joy and sorrow, growth and decay. She wove not just the material world, but the very soul of humanity, stitching together the hearts of all who came into her presence. The people of the land understood the sacredness of Utu's gift. They knew that their very existence was tied to the patterns she wove. It was her hands that had shaped the first seeds of life, that had nurtured the earth's fertile soil, and that had given birth to the first humans. Her creations were the symbols of life's potential, the crops that grew from the soil, the children that were born into the world, the dreams that were spun within the hearts of those who believed in her power. But it was her weaving of the intangible, the threads of fate, that made Utu's role so profound. The gods themselves would turn to her, seeking the intricate patterns that could guide their actions. She was not only a creator but also a keeper of secrets, one who knew the delicate balance between chance and destiny. The very fate of kings, nations, and empires rested in her hands, for it was she who spun the threads that connected them all. When the people faced hardship, when their homes were torn apart by war or disaster, it was Utu they called upon. They prayed for her to restore the balance, to weave the torn fabric of their lives back together. And in her divine wisdom, she would listen. With a gentle touch, she would mend the rifts in the world, slowly weaving the brokenness back into the pattern of life. She brought healing, not just to the body but to the soul. Her loom, they believed, was a place where all life was born and reborn. It was said that Utu would weave the fabric of the seasons, each year a new pattern, each harvest a new thread. When the earth grew cold, and the crops lay dormant beneath the frost, it was Utu's weaving that gave the world its time of rest, a time when all things would be prepared for the renewal to come. Her hands would weave the new life into the earth, ensuring that the cycle of growth would continue, year after year, without fail. And in those moments of renewal, when the flowers bloomed once again and the fields grew lush with grain, the people would give thanks to Utu. They knew that the beauty of the earth was a reflection of her eternal weaving, her care for the world she had created. Her hands, like threads in a tapestry, had touched every living thing, every leaf, every blade of grass. They prayed that she would continue to weave their lives with the same care, the same love, the same precision that she had always shown. Utu's role as the goddess of fertility extended beyond the physical world. She was a goddess of the heart, of love and relationships, of the bonds that held families together. Her hands wove the bonds of marriage, the ties between parent and child, the deep connections between friends and lovers. She was the goddess of intimacy, not just in the physical sense, but in the deeper, unspoken ways that people touched one another's lives. Her weaving extended into the dreams of those who sought her favor. It was said that when a person was in need of guidance, when their heart was uncertain, Utu would weave a vision for them. Through the pattern she created, she would show them the path they must take, the decisions they must make, and the lessons they needed to learn. Her dreams were woven with the same care as the fabric of the world, each vision a thread that guided the soul toward its destiny. As the seasons passed, and the earth turned once more toward renewal, Utu's name was spoken with reverence. She was the one who wove the threads of life, who nurtured the earth and all who lived upon it. Her loom was a symbol of the ever-changing, ever-growing nature of existence. And in the quiet moments of the night, when the world was still, it was said that you could hear her hands at work, weaving the dreams of the future and the memories of the past, binding them together in a pattern that was both beautiful and eternal. The land trembled beneath the weight of her presence, and the heavens above quaked in response. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, stood at the threshold of two worlds, straddling the line between creation and destruction. Her beauty, unmatched by any mortal or divine, was a force of nature, capable of stirring hearts to passion and tearing them asunder in the same breath. In her, Both the nurturing touch of a mother and the unforgiving wrath of a conqueror existed side by side, each waiting to emerge with equal power. Her voice was said to echo across the plains, carrying with it the promise of both desire and devastation. The men and women who heard her call were drawn into a web of longing and ambition, yearning for the touch of her love or the fury of her wrath. Inanna was not a goddess who could be understood with mere words or logic. She was a paradox, a duality wrapped in a single, powerful form. To love her was to risk everything, for in loving her, you also risked losing yourself entirely. Inanna's love was not soft or gentle. It was fierce, burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns. It was a fire that could consume all that it touched, but in that destruction, there was also creation. Her love could bring life into being, but it could just as easily tear it apart, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. She was the goddess who gave birth to both the wildest passions and the deepest sorrows. She was the embodiment of the delicate balance between attraction and repulsion, creation and destruction. Yet, for all her beauty, it was her warlike nature that often overshadowed her gentler aspects. Inanna was a goddess of conquest, a warrior queen who reveled in the chaos of battle. When she took up her weapons, she became an unstoppable force, a storm of rage and power. Her eyes burned with the desire to conquer, her heart beat to the rhythm of victory. She was the one who led armies to triumph, the one who brought terror to the hearts of her enemies. In battle, she was both the sword and the shield, wielding destruction with a ferocity that left no room for mercy. Her enemies feared her not only because of her strength, but because of her unpredictability. One moment, Inanna could be a lover, tender and compassionate, offering solace and comfort to those in need. The next, she could become a destroyer, a force of vengeance that would not rest until her enemies lay in ruin. This dual nature made her both revered and feared. To cross her was to risk invoking the fury of a goddess who could not be appeased by simple offerings or prayers. She demanded respect, and when that respect was not given, she would take what she desired with no hesitation. Inanna's story was woven into the fabric of every corner of the ancient world. Her name was whispered in the winds of battle and sung in the songs of lovers. She was the muse of poets and the terror of kings. Every man, woman, and child knew of her power, and yet none could ever truly understand her. They could only accept her presence, knowing that love and war, creation and destruction, were intertwined in her very essence. Her most famous myth, the descent into the underworld, spoke to her dual nature in a way that nothing else could. Inanna, in her quest for power and knowledge, descended to the realm of the dead, a place where even she could not escape the grasp of fate. She went there not as a queen, but as a goddess seeking to expand her dominion, willing to sacrifice herself in order to gain greater power. But in that dark place, she was stripped of her divine garments, her beauty and strength laid bare, and her vulnerability exposed. She was forced to confront the darker aspects of herself, the parts of her that could not be tamed by love or war, the parts that were beyond even her control. It was in that descent that Inanna truly revealed her complexity. She was not just a goddess of love and war, but of transformation. She was a symbol of the cyclical nature of life, of the constant ebb and flow between life and death, creation and destruction. The moment of her lowest point, when she lay dead in the underworld, was also the moment of her rebirth. It was from the ashes of her own death that she rose once more powerful than ever, ready to resume her place among the gods. This resurrection was not just a physical one. It was a spiritual awakening, a reminder that from destruction, new life could emerge. Inanna, in all her contradictions, understood this better than anyone. She knew that love without war was meaningless, just as war without love was hollow. The two, together, created the rhythm of existence. Without one, the other would cease to exist. Inanna's love and war were not just matters of passion or politics, they were forces that shaped the world itself. The cycles of nature, the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of gods, these were all influenced by her power. She was the goddess who bridged the gap between the divine and the mortal, the one who showed that the world could not be understood through one lens alone. Life, like Inanna herself, was both beautiful and terrifying, nurturing and destructive. And so, her name echoed through the ages, a reminder of the eternal dance between love and war, creation and destruction. The story of Inanna was not just the story of a goddess, it was the story of all that is, all that was, and all that will ever be. She was the heartbeat of the universe, a pulse that could be both tender and violent, gentle and relentless. To know Inanna was to know the very soul of existence itself. The air grew thick with the silence of death, an oppressive stillness that seemed to swallow all light and life. Beneath the earth, in the realm where no sun touched, Ereshkigal sat on her throne, an embodiment of solitude, power, and sorrow. The queen of the underworld ruled over the dead with a cold, unwavering authority. Her realm, a place of eternal darkness and despair, was far removed from the vibrant world above where gods like Inanna reveled in love and war. Ereshkigal was not like her sister, full of fire and passion. She was the stillness that follows the storm, the depth of the ocean where no light can reach. Her beauty, unlike Inanna's, was not of the earth's warmth or the heaven's brightness. It was a beauty of the void, a stark, haunting presence that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Her gaze was said to be enough to freeze the heart of anyone who dared meet it. Her face, though never described with the warmth that radiated from the other gods, carried an unyielding majesty that no one could question. She was not just a goddess of death, she was the keeper of the final resting place, the one who held the keys to the end of all things. Ereshkigal's heart was not one easily understood. It was a heart burdened with grief, isolation, and the weight of responsibility. She was alone in her kingdom, surrounded by the souls of those who had passed, and though she held immense power, she was never free from the knowledge of what she ruled. She knew the lives of all those who came to her realm, the lives they had lived, the people they had loved, and the things they had left behind. She was the keeper of their final moments, the witness to their journey beyond. But in that role, she was a prisoner too, bound to the underworld as surely as the souls she tended. Her relationship with her sister Inanna was one of complexity. The two had shared a bond of family, of being two parts of a greater whole. Yet, that bond was tested the moment Inanna, full of ambition and fire, descended into the underworld. Inanna, in her pursuit of power, thought she could conquer death, but she did not understand that death could not be tamed or defeated. It was a force of nature, something eternal that even the gods could not control. Ereshkigal watched as her sister, bold and proud, came before her, demanding entrance into her realm. And though she had no desire to harm her, the rules of the underworld were not to be broken, not even by a goddess. When Inanna, in her defiance, was stripped of her garments and left to die in the depths of the underworld, Ereshkigal did not celebrate. She did not rejoice in her sister's fall. Instead, she mourned. For in her heart, there was always a deep sadness, a yearning for connection, for the love she could never fully receive. The throne of the underworld, though it gave her power, also gave her loneliness. She ruled over the dead, but she was not dead herself, and that separation was an ache that never left her. She could not help but feel sorrow for those who entered her realm, for in them she saw her own endless existence, a life spent alone, forever separate from the living, from those who could still experience the beauty of the world above. And yet, despite this sorrow, Ereshkigal was resolute. She had no choice but to rule. The dead needed a queen, a sovereign who would ensure that they were cared for, that they were not forgotten. She could not afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment, not when the balance between life and death rested upon her shoulders. The dead, after all, needed her to be strong, unyielding, a force that would see them safely into the afterlife. Her domain, though dark and cold, was necessary, and she knew that. But even Ereshkigal was not immune to the weight of her own nature. When her sister's life was returned to her, when Inanna was resurrected and freed from the underworld's grip, Ereshkigal's heart was torn. She knew that the world above would never understand the depth of her sacrifice. They would never see the quiet strength it took for her to allow Inanna's return, knowing that it meant her own loss. Inanna was free, and Ereshkigal was left with the cold truth of her own existence, a queen of the dead, who could never leave the underworld to experience the warmth of the living world. Still, in her heart, she understood. She understood the balance of life and death. Without death, there could be no life, and without life, there would be no death. She knew that her role was one of necessity. She was the keeper of the souls who had passed, and though she longed for something more, she accepted her place. The underworld, with all its darkness, was her domain, and in it, she was the most powerful being of all. But power, as she knew, was not always a gift. Sometimes, it was a burden. Ereshkigal's realm was not one of chaos or destruction, it was one of quietude and reflection. The souls who passed through her gates found rest, peace, and sometimes, even redemption. But they also found the weight of their choices. Ereshkigal, in her wisdom, knew that life could not be measured by accomplishments or victories. It was the quiet moments, the simple acts of love and kindness, that held true meaning. The underworld was where all things came to rest, where the final judgment was passed, and in that finality, there was both peace and sorrow. Her power did not lie in her ability to crush or destroy. It lay in her ability to carry the weight of existence, of all that came before, and all that would follow. Ereshkigal was not just the queen of the dead, she was the keeper of endings. But endings, as she knew, were never truly final. They were simply a pause, a moment of stillness before the next beginning. And in that quiet stillness, Ereshkigal reigned, alone, but never truly alone. The air around Nergal was heavy with the stench of decay and the sound of battle. His presence alone was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest warrior. The god of war and pestilence, Nergal, walked between two worlds, the world of life, where blood was spilled in the heat of battle, and the world of death, where diseases spread like wildfire, claiming the weak and the strong alike. He did not fear either realm. In fact, he was their master. Where others saw destruction, he saw purpose. Born of chaos, Nergal was a deity whose heart beat in rhythm with the world's most primal forces, violence, suffering, and death. His power was the kind that could sweep across a land, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. Wars, plagues, and the endless dance of death, all of them were his dominion. The gods above might have represented the beauty of life, creation, and love, but Nergal embodied the harsh, unyielding reality of what followed. He was the storm that followed the calm, the shadow cast by every light. He was the harbinger of death, but not the kind that arrived in silence. No, Nergal came with a fury. When he descended upon the earth, it was as if the very skies themselves darkened in anticipation. The winds howled with rage, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of his wrath. In his wake, cities crumbled, armies were decimated, and the innocent, caught in the sweep of his relentless power, fell victim to the plague that he brought with him. His heart was filled with fire. A fire that burned everything it touched, whether it be the blood of enemies on the battlefield or the body of a child struck down by disease. To Nergal, there was no distinction between the two. Both were forms of sacrifice, both were necessary for the world to continue. He did not view his actions as cruelty, he saw them as the necessary culling of life. For in his eyes, every death served a greater purpose. Without death, there could be no life. Without suffering, there could be no appreciation of peace. He was the embodiment of the balance, the fierce, untamable force that kept the universe in check. Yet, beneath this violent exterior, Nergal was not without complexity. His was a heart forged in fire, and like all who burn with such intensity, there were moments when the flames threatened to consume him from within. There were days when Nergal sat upon his throne, looking into the abyss, questioning the nature of his existence. For even gods are not immune to doubt. His power was vast, but was it truly his choice to wield it in such a way? Did he long for the quiet of peace, the gentleness of healing? Or was he forever bound to the chaos, the wars, the plague? These were thoughts that plagued him when the winds of battle were far away, when the cries of dying men were only distant echoes. The underworld, his domain, was not a quiet place. It was not a land of eternal rest, but of endless struggle. Nergal ruled over the dead, but he was not content with simply watching them pass. No, he made sure that they were tested. His warriors, beasts of fury and fire, stalked the halls of the underworld, hunting those who entered and challenging them to prove their worth. To be dead was not enough. One had to face Nergal's judgment, and that judgment was cruel, relentless, and final. Only the strong survived his trials. But it wasn't only in death that Nergal found his purpose. His role in the world of the living was just as crucial. Plagues, famine, and war were all part of his will. He would send them to ravage entire civilizations, watching as families tore each other apart in desperation, as cities crumbled under the weight of their own suffering. He reveled in it, not because he hated the living, but because he knew that such trials were necessary. It was only in the face of destruction that the true nature of life could be revealed. People, he knew, often took peace for granted. They forgot what it meant to fight, to survive. His role was to remind them. Nergal was both a god and a force of nature, untamable and wild. He was not swayed by pleas for mercy or cries for help. His heart was a furnace, burning with an unquenchable thirst for balance, for order through destruction. Yet, his power was not without its consequences. As he wrought chaos upon the world, as he spread his plagues and sparked wars, there were those who resisted him. The gods above, ever seeking to preserve the order of the world, fought to contain him. But Nergal was no mere deity. He was a storm, a plague, a force that could not be so easily controlled. In the eyes of the living, Nergal was a monster, a god who brought nothing but suffering. But to him, suffering was just another form of life. It was the pain of existence, the cost of being. He was a god of destruction, yes, but in that destruction lay the seeds of renewal. Through war, new empires were born. Through pestilence, the weak were culled, making way for the strong. He was not just the god of death, but the god of change, the god who made sure that nothing remained static. The world was in constant motion, and Nergal ensured that it would always move forward, whether through bloodshed or plague. Even the gods feared him, for Nergal was not easily appeased. He demanded respect, and when the world grew too complacent, too comfortable, he reminded them that life, in all its beauty, was fleeting. He would burn it all down if he had to. His fury knew no bounds, and he would never rest until the balance had been restored. For Nergal, there was no peace, no end. Only the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth, an endless dance that he led with an iron fist, casting aside anyone who dared question his power. And yet, in the darkest corners of his being, Nergal knew that one day, even he would fall. The universe was too vast, too unyielding to be ruled by a single god forever. But until that day came, he would reign as the god of war, the god of pestilence, the god who brought the fire of destruction to burn away the world, only to watch it rise again in the ashes. He was the storm, the plague, and the god who could never be contained. There are whispers that travel through the silent corridors of the underworld, carried on the cold breath of death itself. In those whispers, there is one name that emerges again and again, Namtar. He is the herald, the messenger who moves between worlds, the one who brings the inevitable conclusion to every life. The inevitable weight of his arrival is a moment feared by all, whether in the light of day or the shadows of night. His presence is a promise that can't be denied, no matter how hard anyone tries to outrun it. The mere mention of Namtar's name strikes fear into the hearts of those still bound to the world of the living. His footsteps are the quiet death knell, heard only in the deepest parts of the soul, yet his arrival is felt across the earth. Unlike others who seek glory in the battles of gods or the triumphs of men, Namtar never seeks recognition. He is neither feared for the way he wields power nor respected for his cruelty. He simply is. He is the cold breath of inevitability, the echo of time that refuses to be ignored. In a world full of noise and life, Namtar walks in silence. The concept of death, in many ways, is an enigma, a shadow that never fully reveals itself until the moment it touches you. But Namtar, with his cloak of shadows and his role as the divine messenger, embodies that touch. He is the one who brings the news, the bearer of what must come. His name might not be known by every soul that walks upon the earth, but his influence is undeniable. He is the one who stands at the threshold, waiting to deliver the final decree to all who dare to live. Namtar's job is simple, to deliver the message. It is not for him to decide who will live or die. he only speaks the truth when the moment comes. In his hands, the fate of every mortal and immortal is sealed. And it is in his eyes, dark as the abyss, that the truth lies. He does not speak in words. His message is given without a single syllable. It is understood by all who encounter him, for the silence of his presence says everything. To look upon Namtar is to know that the end is near, but it is not a comfort. It is not peaceful. It is a reminder of all that was, and all that will be lost. Wherever there is death, there is Namtar. Whether a great king falls in battle or a humble farmer is struck by illness, his shadow will be the one that looms over them in the final moments. His face is said to be as cold as the night sky, his features unchanging, his gaze unwavering. He does not cry for the lost, nor does he mourn for the passing. To him, death is simply another part of the cycle, a necessary step in the flow of existence. The living are born, and the dead are taken, and Namtar ensures that no one can escape the journey. But his role, though simple in its execution, is a burden. For though he brings the message, he is the one who witnesses it all. He is the one who stands, ever watchful, ever silent, while the world of the living struggles to deny what is coming. His heart, if it could be called that, is made of the coldest stone, yet it holds the weight of all existence. Every soul that passes through his grasp is a memory, a moment that has ended, but he does not keep them. No. His duty is to carry them away, to deliver them to the afterlife. The souls of those who walk into death are not his to keep, but his to deliver, onward, toward the unknown. The underworld is his domain, the place where the souls find their final rest, or perhaps their final torment. And within that realm, Namtar is ever present. He is not a god of war or chaos, nor is he a deity of peace or creation. He is the bridge between the two realms, the living and the dead. His power lies not in violence or creation, but in the certainty of endings. In a world where nothing is certain, where nothing lasts forever, Namtar is the one force that cannot be denied. His presence is the certainty that every living thing must face. But while many fear him, there is an undeniable respect that hangs in the air when his name is spoken. For how could it be otherwise? How could any living being look at death, at the messenger of death, and not tremble? He is the one who ensures that nothing is wasted. In his eyes, there is no mercy, no cruelty, only truth. The truth that one day, the living must become the dead. And in that truth lies a strange form of clarity. For while the living may fight it, may run from it, Namtar will always be there, patiently waiting for the moment when the soul will slip away. To look upon Namtar is to understand that death is not something that comes from outside, but from within. It is the ending of a cycle, and he is the one who ushers it in. And in this, he is not a monster, but a force of nature. Just as the rain falls to nourish the earth, just as the sun sets to give way to the night, death must come. And Namtar, silent and unyielding, is the one who ensures that it will. He is the herald, the bringer of the end. And when the time comes, he will be there. Silent, ever present, watching as the world lets go of those who can no longer hold on. And when he turns away, it is not a signal of the end, but the promise of a new beginning, one that the living can never truly understand. For the world goes on, and death is simply another part of the endless cycle. Namtar is only the messenger, the one who reminds us of the price of life. And still, though his name strikes fear into the hearts of the living, it also reminds them of the beauty of life. For it is only through the awareness of its fragility that they learn to appreciate the moments they have, to cherish every breath, every step, every heartbeat. In this way, Namtar serves a purpose beyond the end of things. He is not just the bringer of death, but the reminder that life is precious, and that its fleeting nature is the greatest gift of all. The skies above were no longer quiet. A deafening roar echoed across the heavens, a sound so mighty, so profound, that even the gods held their breath. This was the cry of Inanna, the bull of heaven, whose power could shake the foundations of both earth and sky. Born from the union of divine forces, he was no mere beast, but a celestial symbol of strength, aggression, and untamed nature. His eyes burned with fury, his hooves echoed with thunder, and his presence was a force that none, not even the mightiest gods, could ignore. He was no ordinary creature. Gugalana was the manifestation of the heavens' wrath, an embodiment of untamable power. To those who looked up at the stars and wondered about the mysteries beyond their world, the bull of heaven represented the wild, untamed forces of the cosmos. The heavens were not serene and calm, but full of rage and violence, and Gugalana was its physical form. His massive form, crowned with celestial horns that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the universe, was a terrifying symbol of the chaos that existed beyond the reach of mortal understanding. In his movements, the heavens shook, and storms raged, as though the very sky itself trembled in fear of his fury. But the bull of heaven was not simply the creature of destruction. He was a symbol of the consequences that come when the balance between the divine and mortal realms is disturbed. His myth was tied to Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, whose passions and ambitions often led her to cross boundaries that no one dared to challenge. Inanna, ever bold and determined, had set her sights on a powerful conquest, one that would pit her against the great forces of the heavens themselves. In her reckless pursuit of glory and power, Inanna demanded the bull of heaven as her companion, intending to wield him as a weapon in her battle against her brother, the god of the sun, Utu. She sought to prove her own supremacy, to show that even the greatest powers could bend to her will. But she did not understand the true nature of Gugalana, nor the price that would come with taming such an immense force. She was used to conquering, used to winning battles with ease, but Gugalana was different. He was not a pawn to be controlled. He was a force of nature, a beast born from the heavens themselves, and his fury could not be tamed. Inanna's arrogance led her to provoke the bull of heaven, to set him against her enemies. But in doing so, she unleashed a power that she could not control. Gugalana's rampage through the earth was nothing short of cataclysmic. With each step he took, the ground trembled beneath him, and the sky darkened as though night had fallen. He was not simply a beast, he was a harbinger of chaos, an embodiment of the raw, untamed forces of the universe. His power was so overwhelming that it threatened to destroy everything in its path, both gods and mortals alike. It was then that the gods, watching from their celestial thrones, realized the consequences of Inanna's actions. They knew that the bull of heaven was not a creature that could be easily restrained. He was a reminder that no matter how powerful one might become, there were forces beyond comprehension, forces that could not be controlled, no matter how much divine power one possessed. Inanna, once proud and defiant, had set in motion a chain of events that she could not undo. In the end, it was only through the sacrifice of her own beloved consort, Dumuzid, that the wrath of the bull of heaven was finally quelled. The heavens themselves had to be appeased, and Inanna's reckless actions had led to a great loss, a loss that would haunt her for eternity. The bull of heaven, once a celestial beast meant to serve her desires, had become a symbol of the destructive consequences of unchecked ambition. Gugalana, in the aftermath of his rampage, stood as a monument to the chaos that is always just beneath the surface of the cosmos. His myth was a reminder to all, gods and mortals alike, that power, no matter how great, comes with a price. And the price of disturbing the natural order could be catastrophic. But the story of Gugalana does not end with his destruction. In his death, the bull of heaven became a part of the eternal cycle of life and death. His body was said to have been divided, and parts of him were scattered across the earth. Even in his death, his influence lingered, his blood, his flesh, his spirit infused into the world, leaving a lasting mark on the land and the heavens. The great celestial beast was no longer a tangible force of destruction, but a lingering presence, a reminder that even the greatest beings must eventually face the consequences of their actions. Inanna, forever marked by her encounter with Gugalana, would carry the memory of the bull of heaven with her for all eternity. Her pride had led to his death, and though she would go on to conquer more lands and defeat more enemies, she would never again be the same. The power of the bull of heaven had humbled her, and the scars of her actions would be carried in her heart, a reminder of the true cost of ambition. Gugalana's myth, like many in the Mesopotamian pantheon, was not just a tale of gods and beasts, it was a warning. It was a story of the balance between creation and destruction, of the fine line between ambition and recklessness, of the fragile nature of power. The bull of heaven had been born from the heavens, and he had been brought to earth by Inanna's own desire. In the end, it was not the might of the gods that had slain him, but the consequences of a single act, a reminder that no force, no matter how great, could ever escape the weight of its own actions. The moon hung low over the vast, ancient city, its pale light washing over the stone streets, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was a quiet night, one of those nights where the world seemed to hold its breath in reverence, waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. And it did. From the heavens, a soft, glowing figure descended, a presence that radiated calm and certainty. This was Sin, the god of the moon, who ruled not only over the silvery light of the night sky, but also over the very passage of time itself. He was the keeper of the celestial clock, the divine timekeeper who set the rhythms of the universe into motion, ensuring that each moment, each breath, was measured with divine precision. Sin's influence was subtle yet immense. He was not a god of grand displays of power or destruction, but a deity whose wisdom shaped the very fabric of existence. While other gods might have commanded storms or battles, Sin held the key to time's eternal flow. His pale light was a reminder of the eternal cycle of life, of how everything, no matter how powerful, must eventually pass. Under his watchful gaze, the cycles of the moon marked the passage of years, the changing of seasons, and the rise and fall of empires. His was the face of quiet wisdom, the kind that listens patiently and observes without haste, understanding that everything in the universe has its moment, and that time will eventually reveal all. Sin's domain was not just the moon, though it was through the moon's phases that he was most often recognized. He was a timekeeper, a god who held the balance between past, present, and future. His wisdom was so profound that the kings and rulers of Mesopotamia would consult his will when making decisions. They believed that the moon's movements could reveal omens, guide actions, and offer insight into the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. His power was not in the destruction of enemies or the creation of new worlds, but in the gentle, steady hand that held the pulse of time itself. And yet, despite his quiet and contemplative nature, Sin's presence was felt deeply. When darkness fell and the moon rose to its place in the sky, it was a reminder that the god of time was watching, measuring, and guiding. In his gaze, the world seemed to slow, and for a moment, it was as though all things had been brought into focus. The relentless march of time might be a force that few could understand, but Sin did. He was its master, its keeper, and its source of wisdom. In his light, all things were illuminated, not just the world, but the very essence of existence itself. Sin was also a god of secrets, the guardian of hidden knowledge. It was said that in the quiet stillness of the night, when the world was asleep and the moon was full, Sin would whisper his wisdom to those who were willing to listen. Those who could hear his soft, mysterious voice, like the great sages and kings of Mesopotamia, would be blessed with the knowledge of the ages. This divine wisdom was not for the impatient or the shallow. It required time, reflection, and an understanding that the answers to life's deepest questions were not always found in immediate action but in the slow, patient unfolding of time itself. His role as the god of the moon also carried with it the responsibility of overseeing the cycles of life and death. The moon's phases, waxing and waning, full and empty, mirrored the lives of mortals and gods alike. Just as the moon was born anew with each cycle, only to fade away again, so too were all things bound by the cycle of life and death. Nothing, not even the greatest of kings or the most powerful of warriors, could escape the inevitable passage of time. Under Sin's watchful gaze, they were all reminded that their time would come, and that in the grand scheme of things, they were but fleeting moments in the eternal flow of existence. Sin's wisdom was also reflected in his relationship with the other gods. While many deities were defined by their actions and their ability to shape the world with their hands, Sin's power lay in his ability to see the grand picture, to understand how the smallest moments fit into the larger tapestry of the cosmos. He was not a god who sought glory or fame. His strength was not in the noise of battle, but in the quiet stillness of reflection. He knew that time, like the moon, was constant and unyielding. It could not be hurried, nor could it be stopped. And in this, he found his power, the ability to guide those who understood that the key to wisdom lay not in rushing forward but in waiting, observing, and understanding. His connection to the moon also tied him to the concept of fate. The moon's phases were often seen as a metaphor for the ebb and flow of human existence, how everything must change, how life is full of both light and dark, and how even the darkest moments eventually give way to light. Sin, as the god of the moon, was the one who understood these cycles better than any other. He knew that in the end, all things must pass, but that this passing was not something to fear. It was simply part of the natural order, a part of the eternal cycle that governed not just the heavens, but all things that existed. In many ways, Sin was the god of those who sought to understand the mysteries of existence, to find meaning in the passage of time. He was the silent observer, the steady hand that guided the world through its endless cycles. His was not the fire of battle or the thunder of war, but the calm certainty of time itself, a reminder that even in the face of great change, there was always a constant, always a truth that could be relied upon. Under his moonlit gaze, everything was measured, everything had its time, and nothing was ever truly lost. The passing moments, like the phases of the moon, were always part of a greater plan, one that only Sin could fully comprehend. And as long as the moon rose in the sky, his divine wisdom would continue to guide the world through the ages, whispering truths to those who were wise enough to listen. The first light pierced the horizon, washing the land in gold as the darkness retreated. It wasn't just another sunrise. It was the arrival of Shamash, the god of the sun, his blazing chariot slicing through the heavens, scattering shadows and lies alike. His light did more than warm the earth, it laid bare every hidden corner, every secret sin, every truth that mortals tried to bury beneath the veil of night. There was no hiding from him, no refuge from his piercing gaze. Shamash was justice made manifest, and his light was both a blessing and a reckoning. He was not the god to be invoked by those seeking mercy for their transgressions. Shamash was the unyielding force of fairness, a god who saw the world exactly as it was, beautiful and broken, noble and corrupt. His radiance shone upon palaces and hovels alike, showing no favoritism, offering no escape from judgment. To stand in his light was to stand exposed, one's soul laid bare, weighed against the scales of truth. As the god of justice, Shamash held the divine tablets of law. It was said that kings knelt before him, trembling as they awaited his blessings upon their decrees. Without his approval, no law could claim righteousness. His judgment was not driven by anger, nor by vengeance, but by balance. He saw through lies as if they were glass, cutting through the illusions people wove to protect themselves. And yet, he was not cruel. Those who acted with honor and fairness found solace in his warmth. To the innocent, he was a shield, to the wicked, he was an inescapable flame. The people feared him, yes, but they also adored him. He was their protector, the one who ensured that crops would grow, that laborers would be rewarded, that rulers would uphold fairness instead of tyranny. Farmers rose before dawn, looking to his light as they tilled their fields. Merchants prayed to him before their trades, hoping for honest dealings. Travelers lifted their eyes to his position in the sky, trusting him to guide their paths. Shamash was more than a god, he was the embodiment of everything good and right in a world that often leaned toward chaos. Legend spoke of how Shamash's chariot rose each morning from the mountains of the east, blazing a path across the sky, only to descend at night through the gates of the west. But even in darkness, he was never idle. While mortals slept, Shamash continued his work, descending into the underworld to bring light to the dead and judge their souls. His radiance reached even the depths of the abyss, proving that no corner of existence could be truly free from his scrutiny. There was an unsettling comfort in knowing Shamash was always watching. He was there when kings plotted their wars, when thieves crept through the night, when lovers whispered forbidden promises. He saw it all. And yet, he did not strike down every sinner. Instead, he let time and truth unravel their fates. His light did not burn, it revealed. And sometimes, that was more terrifying than fire. In his hands, Shamash carried a ring and rod, symbols of authority that were said to measure divine order. These tools weren't just ornaments, They were instruments of balance, used to weigh hearts and measure the worth of actions. Those who passed his tests earned his favor. Those who failed would know his displeasure, often through misfortune or sickness that followed them like a curse. Stories whispered of Shamash's role in aiding heroes, particularly Gilgamesh, whose quest for immortality brought him to the edge of despair. It was Shamash who lent him courage, lighting his path through forests and mountains. But even Gilgamesh, mighty as he was, could not escape the truth that Shamash represented, that mortality is unshakable, and that no man, no matter how strong, could defy the order of the universe. Priests and prophets spoke of the god's voice as one that rumbled like thunder yet carried the softness of a breeze. It wasn't a voice that could be ignored. When Shamash spoke, it felt less like words and more like the sun piercing through clouds, inevitable and blinding. Kings claimed they heard him in dreams, his words shaping laws that would echo through generations. It was Shamash who inspired Hammurabi's code, the foundation of justice that still haunts modern laws with its echoes of fairness and balance. Yet Shamash was not untouched by sorrow. There were times when his light dimmed, when clouds veiled his face, and the world wondered if he, too, felt the weight of the injustices he witnessed. Did he mourn the innocent lives lost in wars? Did he weep for the lovers separated by cruel fates? Was there regret in his heart for the judgments he was forced to pass? Or was he bound by his divine role, forever bearing the burden of truth with no room for mortal weakness? No one could say for certain. But as long as the sun rose and set, as long as shadows fled before the dawn, the people knew Shamash was there, watching, measuring, and guiding. His light didn't just illuminate the earth, it pierced the human soul, reminding everyone that no sin could remain hidden forever. The truth, like the sun, would always rise. And when it did, it would burn away the lies. He stood at the threshold, his two faces catching the light in different directions, one gazing forward, the other looking back. Isamud was no ordinary god. He was the divine messenger of Enki, the god of wisdom, and he carried the weight of secrets and commands that shaped the fate of mortals and gods alike. His dual visage was not a curse but a gift, eyes that saw both past and future, lips that spoke truths no one dared to utter aloud. To look upon Isamud was to feel the unsettling pull of time bending in two directions at once. His faces reflected contradiction, calm yet urgent, wise yet unyielding. He did not linger in one place for long, for his purpose was movement. Where Enki's wisdom remained rooted in contemplation, Isamud was its voice in action, swift and unstoppable. Legends whispered of his sudden arrivals, his words slicing through silence like a blade. He could appear at the edge of a riverbank, where reeds whispered secrets in the wind, or within the shadowed halls of temples where priests trembled at his presence. No one ever saw him coming, he was simply there. And when he spoke, it was not with the softness of persuasion but with the certainty of a decree. Isamud's loyalty to Enki was unshakable. It was said that he never questioned an order, never hesitated, no matter how dangerous the task. He moved like the wind across deserts and mountains, his footsteps leaving no trace but his words leaving ripples that could turn kingdoms to dust. He carried messages to the gods, weaving their alliances and rivalries with his words. Yet, he also walked among mortals, veiled in mystery, his dual-faced gaze piercing through their lies and fears. Stories tell of the day he descended into the underworld to speak with Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead. It was a place where even gods hesitated to tread, but Isamud's steps did not falter. He entered the shadows carrying Enki's message, his voices echoing through the halls of the dead like distant thunder. One voice soothed while the other commanded, and the restless spirits turned to listen. Even in that place of despair, Isamud's presence demanded attention, a flicker of light in a world of endless night. But there were other tales too, ones that painted him not as a savior but as a herald of doom. When the gods wished to strike down a city or humble a king, it was Isamud who appeared first, his two faces staring into the eyes of the condemned. He spoke of consequences, of balance, of laws that even kings could not escape. And then, as quickly as he arrived, he was gone, leaving only silence and dread in his wake. His dual nature made him a god of contradictions. He brought messages of hope as easily as he carried warnings of despair. His voices sang of birth and death, beginnings and endings, truths and lies intertwined. To those who feared him, he was an omen of chaos. To those who trusted him, he was a beacon of clarity. Priests offered prayers to him before embarking on dangerous ventures, hoping for his favor. Travelers whispered his name at crossroads, believing his two faces could see what lay ahead and what dangers lingered behind. But Tiamat was not a god to be bribed with offerings or swayed by flattery. He served Enki, and through Enki, he served the balance of the world. There is one tale, often told in hushed tones, of the time Tiamat spoke a forbidden truth. It is said he revealed a secret meant only for the gods, a knowledge so dangerous that the earth itself trembled when his words fell. Some believe this secret was about the flood that would drown the world, others say it was the creation of a weapon no mortal should wield. Whatever it was, it changed the course of history, and Tiamat bore the weight of that truth upon both his faces. Yet even then, he did not break. His purpose was not to judge, but to deliver. He was the voice that could not be silenced, the messenger who could not be stopped. And so he continued, crossing rivers and deserts, moving between gods and mortals, always speaking, always watching. In the quiet hours of the night, when shadows stretch long across the earth, some say you can feel his presence. A shift in the wind. A flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. And if you dare to listen, you might hear a voice, not one, but two, whispering truths you're not ready to face. They stood like statues carved from eternity, silent, unyielding, and eternal. Calkul and Kuzuriku, the guardians of the heavenly gates, bore no traces of weakness. Their forms were sculpted with the strength of mountains and the grace of beasts untouched by time. They were not gods of mercy, nor did they belong to the realm of compassion. Instead, they were sentinels, watchful and unblinking, protectors of thresholds no mortal dared approach uninvited. Legends whispered that their eyes burned like molten gold, able to pierce the hearts of liars and cowards. Calkul, with the sharpness of his gaze, could unravel intentions before they were spoken. Kuzuriku, part man and part bull, radiated power so immense that the earth trembled when he shifted his stance. Together, they embodied the barriers between heaven and chaos, an unbreakable line that even gods respected. It was said that the sound of their movements echoed through the heavens like thunder before a storm. Those who heard it knew to fall to their knees, for it marked the passage of a god, or the judgment of one who dared trespass. Calkul, ever vigilant, was the first to see what approached. Kuzuriku, with muscles forged by divine fire, stood ready to strike down anything unworthy. There is a story, ancient and half-forgotten, about the day Calkul and Kuzuriku faced the forces of Tiamat. The great chaos dragon had sent her monstrous children to tear apart the gates of heaven, and the earth itself quaked under their fury. But Calkul did not flinch. He raised his sword, its blade gleaming with the light of stars, and stepped forward. Kuzuriku planted his hooves, horns lowered like the prow of a warship, and braced for the onslaught. The battle was said to last for 7 days and 7 nights. Calkul's sword cut through shadows and scales, while Kuzuriku's hooves shattered bones and earth. The gates shook but did not break, for the guardians stood firm. And when the dawn came, it was their silhouettes that greeted the rising sun, bloodied but unyielding, while the beasts of chaos lay broken at their feet. Even after the victory, their vigilance never waned. They remained at their posts, unmoved by time or the passing of kings. Priests would approach the gates bearing offerings of incense and honey, their hands trembling as they called out prayers. They knew better than to cross without permission, for it was said that Calkul's sword could cut through shadows and souls alike, and Kuzuriku's horns could gore the heavens themselves if angered. But their strength was not only physical. Calkul's eyes were said to see not just what was, but what could be, truths hidden behind veils of time and lies. Kuzuriku's voice, low and resonant, could shatter falsehoods and bring trembling confessions from the proudest of kings. Together, they were both shield and judgment, protecting the divine and punishing the arrogant. Even God showed reverence when approaching the gates. Enlil, the Lord of Storms, was said to nod in respect as he passed. Enki, the god of wisdom, once whispered that Kalkul's silence held more knowledge than most libraries, and Kuzuriku's strength was the foundation upon which the heavens rested. But there were whispers too, darker tales of those who had challenged them. A mortal king, maddened by ambition, once tried to pass through the gates unannounced. He called upon sorcery and sacrifice, believing himself worthy of divinity. The gates did not open. Kalkul stepped forward, his blade flashing, and Kuzuriku's horns lowered. When the dust settled, nothing remained of the king but echoes of his screams carried by the wind. Yet, Kalkul and Kuzuriku were not mindless executioners. They could also grant passage to those deemed worthy. It was said that only the pure of heart could look into Kalkul's burning gaze without turning away, and only the fearless could stand before Kuzuriku without trembling. For those few, the gates would open, revealing paths to divine mysteries that mortals could barely comprehend. Even today, some say their spirits linger in the world, watching unseen from the edges of thresholds. Farmers carving paths through the earth leave offerings of grain, hoping to win Kuzuriku's favor. Travelers pause at crossroads, whispering prayers to Kalkul to shield them from unseen dangers. And those who stand at the brink of life and death sometimes claim to feel a presence, a heavy stillness, a watchful silence, as if two ancient guardians stand just beyond the veil, ready to judge whether they may pass. And so Kalkul and Kuzuriku remain eternal, bound to their duty. They do not rest. They do not falter. And though their forms may no longer walk the earth, their shadows stretch long across time, guarding gates that no mortal may enter unbidden. Darkness whispered her name long before it reached trembling lips, Lamashtu, the devourer of life. She was terror itself, a nightmare given flesh and hunger. Mothers feared her. Midwives prayed against her. She roamed the shadows with claws sharper than obsidian and eyes that burned with a hunger no offering could satisfy. Her breath carried the scent of decay, and her footsteps were said to leave withered earth behind. Legend spoke of how she crept into homes under the cover of night, her jagged teeth bared in a wicked grin. She sought infants, their cries like music to her ears, and mothers who dared to bring life into a world she wished to drown in despair. It was said she fed not just on flesh, but on the very soul of her victims, leaving behind empty shells and hollow cradles. Her name alone could cause expectant mothers to clutch their bellies in fear, whispering prayers to unseen protectors. But for all her cruelty, Lamashtu was not without purpose. She embodied chaos, the force that shattered innocence and reminded mortals of their fragility. Her presence brought a brutal reminder of life's thin, trembling balance, the thread between birth and death, hope and despair. Yet, where there is terror, there is also defiance. Against her darkness rose another name, Pazuzu, the howling wind, the demon king with a lion's roar and the wings of an eagle. He was no savior, no gentle guardian of light, but he was a protector nonetheless. Born from storms and scorching winds, Pazuzu's twisted face and monstrous form inspired fear. But fear was his weapon, not his purpose. Pazuzu stood at the gates of despair and bared his fangs at the nightmares lurking beyond. Mothers called upon him in desperation, placing amulets of his image around their necks and the beds of their children. They believed his gaze, piercing and unyielding, could hold back Lamashtu's hunger. It was said that when her shadow crept too close, Pazuzu's voice would rise like a tempest, driving her back into the abyss from which she came. But he was no gentle guardian. Pazuzu's power was raw, uncontrollable, and wild. He was both savior and threat, his protection often leaving mortals trembling. There were whispers that he did not grant safety freely, but demanded submission, sacrifices of fear and reverence. Those who called upon him too carelessly found themselves haunted by visions of his terrible grin, a reminder that darkness cannot be commanded without cost. There is a tale of a woman who dared summon Pazuzu when her newborn fell sick, fearing that Lamashtu had touched the child. She lit the fire and recited his name, trembling as the wind howled through her home. The shadows danced, and then he appeared, not as a man, but as a towering form with claws and wings. The woman begged for mercy, her voice breaking as she offered incense and blood. Pazuzu accepted, but his eyes lingered on her too long, as if tasting her fear. the child survived. But the woman never spoke of what she saw in Pazuzu's gaze that night, nor did she enter the temple again. Lamashtu and Pazuzu, the predator and the protector, embodied the fragility of human life. One brought fear, the other wielded it. And so, their eternal struggle became woven into the fabric of existence, etched into amulets, carved into walls, and whispered through generations. Even now, their echoes linger. Mothers still place charms of Pazuzu's face above their doors, believing his grotesque form can terrify even the darkest spirits. And though Lamashtu's name is feared, her presence serves as a reminder that light cannot exist without shadow, that protection is only as strong as the terror it holds at bay. The winds howl still, carrying whispers of demons and saviors. And somewhere, in the space between birth and death, their battle rages on. The sound of a reed stylus scraping against clay echoed through the temple halls, a rhythm older than kings and empires. It was said that time itself was carved into those tablets, preserved under the watchful eye of Nabu, the god whose words shaped destinies. To speak his name was to summon the pulse of civilization, the scribe's hurried hands, the merchant's careful ledgers, and the king's proclamations etched into eternity. Nabu did not shout his power from the heavens like the storm gods. He did not rage with fire or wield the blade of war. His strength was quieter, yet more absolute. He ruled with ink and symbols, crafting laws that outlived those who made them and prayers that lingered long after voices fell silent. Beneath his gaze, knowledge became immortal. In the dim glow of oil lamps, scribes prayed to him as their fingers danced over tablets, shaping letters that carried the weight of kingdoms. Nabu's breath was in the spaces between each line, and his presence lingered in the flicker of light that stretched shadows across clay. It was he who granted mortals the gift of writing, the power to trap thought in symbols and bind time itself to the earth. But Nabu was more than a keeper of words. He was the voice of divine wisdom, the counselor whose guidance shaped the wills of gods and kings. He was the one who recorded oaths made before the heavens, ensuring that no vow could be erased, no betrayal forgotten. His stylus was a blade that carved truth into permanence, and his scrolls bore the weight of secrets both sacred and profane. There are stories of how Nabu's words turned the tide of war without a single drop of blood spilled. In one tale, a rival king sought to invade Babylon, believing his army's strength would shatter its walls. But Nabu's priests brought forth tablets inscribed with divine warnings, curses penned in his name. Fear spread like fire, and the enemy laid down their weapons before even crossing the border. Such was the power of words under Nabu's seal, they commanded without sword or spear. But his gifts came with burdens. Those who served him bore the weight of knowledge too great for ordinary minds to hold. Some scribes whispered of dreams that haunted them, visions of truths they were not meant to see. They spoke of nights spent bent over tablets, their hands trembling as if the letters themselves pulsed with life. To write in Nabu's name was to open doors that could never be closed. It was said that even the gods deferred to him. While Marduk ruled as king, it was Nabu who preserved his decrees. When disputes arose among the divine, Nabu's voice was the final word, and his record served as evidence in celestial courts. He stood not as a warrior, but as a judge whose scrolls were mightier than any blade. And yet, Nabu's role as guardian of wisdom made him both revered and feared. Mortals begged for his favor, but they also feared his judgment. For every prayer he answered, there were whispers that he kept a ledger of sins too, a divine record that no man could erase. Those who lived by deception feared his gaze, for they knew that no lie could stand before the God who carved truth into stone. In Babylon, his statue was paraded through streets during festivals, adorned with gold and laurels. The crowd cheered, but their voices carried unease, as though even celebration could not escape his scrutiny. For in their hearts, they knew Nabu was watching, and his stylus never rested. Among the scribes, there was an unspoken ritual. Before writing, they touched their styluses to their foreheads, a silent plea for Nabu's blessing. It was not just for inspiration, but for protection. They feared the weight of the words they would write, knowing that what was recorded could never be undone. In the stillness of night, when only the scratch of styluses filled the air, it was said that Nabu walked unseen among the scribes. His footsteps stirred the dust, and his breath stirred thoughts too heavy for mortal minds. Those who glimpsed him spoke of eyes that burned like stars, as if the heavens themselves had poured their knowledge into his gaze. And so, his name endured, not as a conqueror, but as a keeper of truths. Nabu, whose words shaped laws and legends, who bound gods and men alike to the unyielding chains of memory. Even now, when the clay tablets have crumbled and the styluses lie broken, his shadow lingers in every word written, every secret kept, and every truth that refuses to die. The first brick fell into place with a soft, deliberate thud, followed by another, and then another, each one carrying a silent prayer. It was said that no wall, no temple, no palace could rise without Kala, the god whose hands shaped the foundations of civilization. In the stillness before dawn, as the builders gathered their tools, their whispered invocations to Kala hung in the air like threads of smoke, binding the laborers to the divine. Kala was not a god of thrones or storms. He did not command armies or tear through the skies. His power lay in the earth, in the clay molded by calloused hands and the sweat poured into creation. He was the architect of permanence, the unseen force that turned dust into cities and dreams into monuments. There is an old story that speaks of Kala's birth, of how he emerged from the mud of the primordial rivers, carrying the knowledge of shaping and stacking, of building order from chaos. The gods called him forth when the world was raw and unshaped, and it was he who taught mortals how to tame the earth. With his blessing, they molded bricks and pressed their marks into wet clay, leaving behind the symbols of eternity. But Kala's gifts were not easily earned. Builders feared his gaze, knowing that their work had to meet his unyielding standards. A single cracked stone or misaligned wall could invite his wrath, bringing collapse and ruin. And so, before the first brick was laid, offerings were made, fragrant oils poured onto sacred altars, and the blood of lambs spilled onto the soil. The scent of sacrifice mingled with the smell of wet clay, binding the workers to the god's favor. Legends tell of how Kala once refused to bless a palace for a king whose pride overshadowed his piety. The walls rose high, but cracks spread like veins through the foundation. When the king's masons ignored the warnings, the ground trembled, and the palace crumbled into dust. It was a lesson carved into memory, that without reverence for Kala, even the strongest stones would fail. Yet Kala was also a god of mercy. In times of disaster, when floods washed away homes and temples, it was to him that survivors prayed. They called him the restorer, the healer of ruins. After every collapse, his priests guided the rebuilding, their hands tracing sacred patterns into the mortar. They believed that Kala's presence could be summoned by these rituals, turning despair into renewal. In the heart of Babylon, builders carried small statues of Kala, tucked into their belts or hidden beneath their robes. These tiny idols, molded from clay and fired in the same kilns as bricks, were talismans against failure. It was said that as long as Kala's image watched over the workers, their walls would stand strong, and their towers would scrape the heavens. But Kala's protection came at a cost. Builders spoke of nights haunted by his whispers, soft, urgent commands that echoed in their dreams. They awoke with visions of patterns and measurements they could not understand, compelled to build without rest. Some believed these dreams were blessings, blueprints sent from the divine. Others feared they were curses, signs that Kala demanded more than flesh and blood could give. In one tale, a mason named Ereshu claimed to have seen Kala with his own eyes. He described a figure made of clay and stone, with arms like pillars and eyes that glowed like molten gold. Kala's voice, Ereshu said, was like the grinding of stones, commanding him to build a wall that could never be broken. The mason obeyed, working without sleep until the wall was finished. When it stood unyielding, Ereshu fell to his knees in gratitude, only to realize that his hands had been worn raw, his strength drained. He died before sunrise, but his wall still stood centuries later, untouched by time. Builders whispered this story to one another, passing it down as both a warning and a blessing. To call upon Kala was to invite greatness, but also sacrifice. For every temple that reached the heavens, there was a price paid in sweat, blood, and bone. And yet, the masons continued to call his name. They carved his symbols into cornerstones and pressed his mark into the mortar. They understood what others did not, that creation was a fragile thing, born from toil and faith. Without color, cities would crumble, and the dreams of kings would sink back into dust. Even now, when the ruins of ancient temples stand half-buried in sand, there are whispers of color's presence. The stones, weathered and broken, seem to hold their shape out of stubborn defiance, as though the god's touch still lingers in the mortar. And in the echoes of forgotten prayers, one can almost hear the rhythm of bricks being laid, one by one, under the watchful eye of the builder's god. The dawn had not yet broken when the first Apkallu appeared, shimmering like the water of a hidden spring. The air hung heavy with secrets, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of their arrival. These were not men, nor gods in the way the world knew them. They were something between, born of both divine wisdom and earthly labor. The Apkallu were Ea's chosen, semi-divine beings who carried the essence of the deep waters, draped in the knowledge of the ages. And with them, they brought gifts that would forever change the course of human history. No one knew exactly where the Apkallu came from. Some said they emerged from the Euphrates, emerging from the depths like pearls glinting in the sun. Others whispered that they were born of the union between gods and mortals, sent to teach humanity the lost arts, how to build cities, how to weave spells, how to read the stars. But there was no doubt about one thing: they were messengers of Ea, the god of wisdom and waters, and they carried with them the power to shape the world. There were 7 of them in total, each one a reflection of a different aspect of knowledge, and each one tasked with a specific role in guiding the people of Mesopotamia. They were not just teachers, they were living symbols of divine wisdom, protectors of sacred knowledge. They whispered into the ears of kings and prophets, imparting secrets that could alter destinies. When they spoke, their words were not merely guidance, they were commands. They were the living embodiment of the laws of the cosmos, and anyone who ignored them would risk the wrath of Ea himself. The Apkallu were said to be beautiful beyond mortal understanding, their faces radiant with the glow of the gods, yet their eyes carried the weariness of age, as if they had witnessed the creation and destruction of worlds. Their hair shimmered like water flowing over smooth stones, their bodies draped in the finest robes of the gods, their movements both graceful and solemn. They were not bound by time, but they knew its every passing moment. They were more than just teachers, they were vessels of the divine, and their very presence made the air thick with the weight of cosmic knowledge. In the ancient city of Eridu, where Ea's temple stood proud and strong, the Apkallu were first seen. Their arrival was marked by the opening of the great floodgates, a moment so profound that the earth seemed to stop breathing. The people who had gathered at the temple fell to their knees as the Apkallu walked among them, touching their heads in benediction. The floodwaters that had receded with Ea's blessing surged again, but this time it was not a symbol of destruction. Instead, it was a sign of renewal, of life being poured into the dry earth. The Apkallu's teachings were not just about the arts of building and magic, though those were their most well-known gifts. They also brought wisdom about the heavens, how to read the movements of the stars, how to predict the coming of storms, how to understand the divine will in the natural world. They taught men and women how to craft weapons that would protect their homes, how to grow crops that would feed their people, how to write down the thoughts of kings and scribes for posterity. They gave the people the tools to shape their world in the image of the gods themselves. But for all their knowledge, the Apkallu were not without their burdens. To bear the weight of such wisdom was a lonely existence. They could not walk among the common people without causing fear and awe, their presence a constant reminder of their divine nature. Though they taught humanity to build, they were also aware that their creations would one day fall into ruin. The Apkallu knew the secret of time's passing, and they could see the inevitable decay that awaited every structure, every city, every soul. They were eternal, and yet they were bound by the knowledge that nothing in the mortal world could last. As the Apkallu taught, the cities of Mesopotamia flourished. Temples rose from the earth, their walls adorned with intricate carvings that told the stories of the gods. Palaces grew grander, filled with scrolls of wisdom and treasures plundered from distant lands. The people, once simple farmers and shepherds, became mighty kings and scholars, building empires that would last for generations. All of this was because of the Apkallu, whose hands shaped the foundation of civilization. But despite their gifts, the Apkallu were not immune to the pain of watching the world they had helped create slip into ruin. In time, some of the Apkallu disappeared, vanishing into the mysteries of the earth and water from which they had come. Some say they returned to Ea's temple, choosing to remain in the sacred waters, where they could no longer be seen by mortal eyes. Others say they wandered off into the wilderness, never to be heard from again. But their teachings endured, passed down through the generations. Even today, when the wind rustles through the ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities, one can almost hear the whispers of the Apkallu, fragments of their knowledge carried on the breeze. They live on in the stones of temples, in the writings on ancient tablets, and the legends passed down by those who remember the time when gods walked the earth and shared their secrets with mankind. And while they may no longer appear to us in physical form, their presence still lingers in the hearts of those who seek wisdom and understanding. The Apkallu were not just divine advisors, they were the very heartbeat of a civilization that believed in the power of knowledge, the sacredness of learning, and the connection between the divine and the human. The hammer struck the anvil with a deafening ring, the sound reverberating across the land, echoing through the hearts of all who dared to listen. Sparks flew from the forge, their fiery trails like shooting stars, falling to the earth in a spectacle of light and heat. In the midst of this chaos stood Jibal, his form half hidden in the swirling heat of the flames, his eyes glowing with the intensity of the fire he commanded. He was the god of fire and smithing, the divine blacksmith, the protector of craftsmen and those who dared to mold the world with their hands. He was the one who forged not just weapons of war, but the very essence of civilization. For Jibal, fire was both a tool and a weapon, a force of creation and destruction. It was a gift and a curse, something that could light the darkest corners of the world or consume everything in its path. As the master of fire, Jibal held the key to the most powerful element known to man. But unlike the destructive forces that often took form in flames, Jibal was a god of discipline, order, and artistry. It was not chaos that he birthed from the flames, but perfection, strength, and beauty. In the ancient workshops of Mesopotamia, craftsmen gathered around the forge, their faces smudged with soot, their hands rough from years of labor. They prayed to Jibal before each new project, invoking his name to ensure the strength and quality of their work. The gods were never far from their minds, for it was said that Jibal himself would guide their hands as they shaped metal and stone. The finest swords, the strongest plows, the most intricate jewelry, everything that came from the forge bore his mark, a mark of divine craftsmanship that set it apart from mere mortal work. Jibal's mastery over fire was legendary. He had the ability to temper even the wildest blaze, to bend it to his will. Where lesser gods might have created destruction in the form of uncontrolled flames, Jibal saw fire as a force of precision, capable of crafting intricate designs and imbuing tools with power. His divine hands could take raw, unshaped materials and turn them into something useful, something beautiful, something eternal. He was the embodiment of transformation, the one who could take the base and the formless and shape them into something that held meaning. But despite his divine status, Jibal never looked down upon the mortal craftsmen who worked with fire. He respected them, for they shared his passion for creation. The mortal world, after all, was his canvas. He reveled in the artistry of the craftsmen, the way they took his gifts of flame and made them their own. It was said that every time a blacksmith struck his anvil, Jibal's hammer rang in unison, as if the god himself were joining in the labor, working side by side with his chosen people. Yet, for all his power, Jibal was not immune to the dangers of his craft. Fire, though a tool of creation, was also a force of destruction. It was said that once, in a fit of divine rage, Jibal allowed his flames to burn out of control, setting fire to the heavens themselves. The sky turned red with the intensity of his wrath, and the stars trembled at the power he commanded. It was only through the intervention of the other gods that the flames were finally subdued, and Jibal, humbled, learned that even a god must exercise caution with the forces of nature. Still, Jibal's reputation as the divine blacksmith never wavered. In the world of men, he was the one who protected them from the dangers of their own creations. He ensured that the weapons they forged would bring victory in battle, that the tools they made would till the soil and feed the people. He was the god who granted strength to those who worked with their hands, the one who empowered them to take raw materials and shape their destinies. Every sword forged in the heat of battle carried his power, every plow that broke the earth bore his blessing. In the clanging of metal, Jibbal's divine presence could be felt, a reminder that the forge was sacred, a space where gods and men could meet in the work of creation. But Jibbal was not just a god of power. He was a god of purpose, of the quiet strength that comes from working tirelessly towards a goal. His followers understood that crafting was not merely about skill or mastery, it was about heart. The fire that burned in the forge was a reflection of the fire that burned in their souls. In the quiet moments of hammering metal, they connected with Jibbal's divine will, and in doing so, they found meaning in their labor. Every piece of armor, every finely crafted tool, was a testament to their devotion, to their belief that the work of their hands was not just mundane but sacred. Jibbal's influence reached beyond the blacksmith's forge. He was invoked by kings and warriors, for he was not only a god of creation but a protector of the realm. His fire burned in the hearts of those who took up arms in defense of their land, and his blessing could turn the tide of battle. The weapons forged in his name were unmatched in strength, and it was said that those who carried a sword blessed by Jibbal would never falter in battle, for the flames of the god would guide their strikes. The gods themselves looked to Jibbal for counsel when it came to matters of creation and destruction. Though he was often seen at the heart of the forge, crafting new worlds from fire and metal, he was also a listener. His calm, steady nature made him a trusted advisor to those who sought his wisdom. He was the god who understood that creation could not exist without destruction, and destruction could not happen without creation. His dual nature, creator and destroyer, made him a figure of great respect, for he was not afraid to walk the fine line between these two forces. Jibbal's legacy, however, was more than just in the weapons he forged or the tools he crafted. His true gift to humanity was the understanding that fire, like all things, must be treated with reverence. It was not something to be feared but respected. Fire was the heart of the world, the spark of life, and it was through Jibbal's teachings that humanity learned to harness its power for good. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the ancient trees towering above like silent sentinels. The forest stretched out, boundless and untouched, a sacred place where no mortal dared to tread. But within the heart of the cedar forest, where the trees whispered secrets older than time, there was something far more terrifying than the wilderness itself. Something that could crush a man's soul with a single glance. Humbaba. The name struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. To speak it was to invite doom. He was not a god, nor a simple mortal, but a monstrous guardian of unimaginable strength, placed in the forest by the gods themselves to protect it from those who would seek to defile its sanctity. But as much as he was a protector, he was also a creature of vengeance, of rage, a being that could never be reasoned with, only confronted. The story of Humbaba begins with his birth, his creation, or perhaps his curse. His flesh was as tough as stone, his roar like thunder, and his eyes burned with an otherworldly fire. He was made to guard the forest, the trees that held within them the sacred power of the gods. No one had the right to enter the forest, and those who did met a fate far worse than death. It was said that his very presence could turn the air to poison, his breath an infernal miasma that could wither the strongest of men. The ground beneath his feet would tremble, as though the earth itself feared his might. His voice, when he spoke, was the sound of 1,000 storms, each word laced with a warning that only the brave or the foolish would dare to ignore. Yet, Humbaba was not a creature of pure malevolence. He was, in a way, the forest's soul, its protector, its eternal sentinel. He stood watch over the cedar trees, ensuring that no one would cut them down, no one would defile the sacred ground. The gods had entrusted him with this responsibility, and he took it with a zeal that was unmatched. His wrath was not born out of malice, but out of duty. He had no choice but to strike down those who dared to trespass. But the world was changing, and with it, the hearts of men. When Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk, and his companion Enkidu decided to venture into the cedar forest and slay Humbaba, they were not driven by the need for destruction, but by the hunger for glory. To kill Humbaba was to prove themselves immortal. To slay the guardian of the forest would place them in the annals of history, their names forever etched in legend. The journey to the forest was one of hardship and peril. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought the elements, fought their fears, and fought themselves. The closer they got to the heart of the cedar forest, the more they felt the presence of Humbaba looming over them, watching, waiting. His shadow stretched long across the land, and even the gods themselves trembled at the thought of his power. When they finally encountered Humbaba, the sight was overwhelming. The forest seemed to come alive around him, the trees groaning under the weight of his immense form. His eyes were like burning coals, his teeth sharp as daggers. He stood taller than any man, a being of such primal fury that the very air seemed to vibrate with his rage. The ground beneath him cracked as he moved, as if nature itself was bending to his will. At first, Humbaba tried to reason with the two heroes. He spoke of the sacredness of the forest, of the divine power that flowed through its trees. He begged them to turn back, to spare him and his home. His voice, though thunderous, held a plea born not of fear, but of sorrow. Humbaba had long understood his role as the protector, and though he fought with all his might, he knew that he was bound by the will of the gods. His existence was a paradox, created to guard, yet condemned to fight. To survive meant to destroy. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu were not deterred. They had come for glory, and nothing would stop them from achieving it. The battle that ensued was nothing short of catastrophic. The very earth seemed to quake with each strike of Humbaba's mighty fists, each swing of Gilgamesh's sword. The air was thick with the clash of power, the sound of gods and mortals colliding in an epic struggle. Each blow seemed to echo the weight of all creation, as if the forest itself were alive, fighting back against the intrusion. For a time, it seemed as though Humbaba might win. His strength was unmatched, his fury uncontainable. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu were determined, their resolve like steel. Together, they fought as one, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. They had no choice but to strike, for the gods had already decided their fate. And in the end, it was Gilgamesh who struck the final blow, plunging his sword into the heart of the great guardian. Humbaba fell, his mighty body crashing to the earth with a sound that seemed to shake the heavens themselves. Yet, even in death, Humbaba did not truly disappear. His spirit lingered in the wind, in the rustling of the trees, in the whispers of the forest. His legacy lived on, not as a monster, but as a symbol of the eternal struggle between nature and humanity, between creation and destruction. He had been the guardian, the protector of the sacred cedar forest, and though he was gone, his presence could still be felt. The gods, too, watched the aftermath with a mixture of sorrow and approval. Humbaba's death was inevitable, yet it was not without consequence. The forest was now open to those who would take what they wanted, but in doing so, they had lost something irreplaceable. The world had taken a step forward, but at the cost of something ancient and irreplaceable. Gilgamesh and Enkidu had succeeded in their quest for glory, but in the end, they would learn that such victories often come at a steep price. Humbaba's legacy would live on in the stories told around campfires, and the songs sung by those who still respected the power of the cedar forest. He was no longer just a guardian, but a martyr, a tragic figure who had died not for his own glory, but for the preservation of something far greater than himself. And in that, perhaps, he had won a victory far greater than any hero could claim. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was a man forged in the fires of ambition and defiance, a ruler of such strength and grandeur that his very name seemed to echo through the heavens. Yet, for all his might, he was not immortal. He was human, bound by the same laws of nature, the same fragile mortality as any other. And it was in this paradox, the collision of his extraordinary powers and his inevitable limitations, that the gods found their entrance into his story. The gods were never far from Gilgamesh's life, their influence as constant as the stars above his kingdom. Their presence was not something easily ignored, for they saw in Gilgamesh a reflection of their own divine nature, and yet they also recognized his flaws, his arrogance, his pride, his hunger for power. Gilgamesh was a hero, yes, but a hero in need of guidance, a hero who had much to learn before he could claim his place among the eternal. It began with his arrogance. Gilgamesh was a king who believed himself to be invincible. He ruled with such power that even the people of Uruk trembled at his command. He took what he wanted, from the riches of the city to the hearts of its women, and none dared to challenge him. His heart, though strong, was full of pride, and the gods watched from their celestial thrones, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, was the first to take notice. She was struck by Gilgamesh's beauty and his strength, and in her own divine way, she sought to bring him to his knees. But when he rejected her advances, mocking her in a way no mortal ever had, the gods were enraged. This was not just a slight against the goddess, but a challenge to the divine order itself. Inanna, hurt and furious, demanded that her father, Anu, punish Gilgamesh for his insolence. Anu, the supreme god of the heavens, listened to his daughter's plea and gave her what she wanted, the release of the Bull of Heaven, a celestial beast whose rampage would devastate Uruk. The gods unleashed their wrath upon Gilgamesh, but they had not anticipated one thing: the hero's resilience. With the strength of 10 men, Gilgamesh faced the Bull of Heaven in a battle that would shake the city's very foundations. His fight was not just against the beast, but against the very will of the gods. In this moment, Gilgamesh was not just a man, he was the embodiment of defiance itself, challenging the celestial forces as if he were their equal. And in the end, he triumphed, slaying the Bull of Heaven and turning the tide of the gods' wrath. But divine retribution was not so easily avoided. Enraged by the loss of their beast, the gods decided to teach Gilgamesh a lesson that no mortal could ignore. They sent a great punishment in the form of a friend, a companion, a being who would test Gilgamesh's spirit and show him the value of humility. Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to balance Gilgamesh's excess, was sent to him as a friend, a rival, and a mirror to his own nature. Enkidu was no mere mortal, but a creation of the gods, shaped from clay and wildness. He lived with the beasts, running through the plains and drinking from the rivers. When he and Gilgamesh met, it was as if two forces of nature collided. At first, they fought, but then, as with all great battles, something else emerged, a bond, a friendship forged in the fires of mutual respect and understanding. Enkidu was the mirror to Gilgamesh's soul, showing him what it meant to be humble, to be human. It was through Enkidu that Gilgamesh began to realize the limitations of his power. He could conquer cities, he could fight beasts, but he could not conquer death. The gods, despite their interventions, could not grant him immortality. And so, the great hero began to search for something more, the secret to life's greatest mystery. But the gods, having set this course of events in motion, knew that Gilgamesh's quest was one he had to undertake alone. They could not simply give him the answer, they had to let him earn it. And so, when Enkidu fell ill and died, a punishment from the gods for their defiance, the impact on Gilgamesh was profound. Enkidu's death was not just the loss of a friend, but a revelation, a brutal reminder of Gilgamesh's own mortality. With Enkidu's death came the realization that no matter how mighty one may be, death would come for all. The gods had watched as Gilgamesh, the great hero, struggled with this truth. They had shaped his fate, led him through trials, and forced him to face the consequences of his actions. They had made him a king and a warrior, but they had also made him mortal. Gilgamesh's journey, then, was not one of conquering the gods, but of understanding them. His battle against the Bull of Heaven, his friendship with Enkidu, and his quest for immortality were all lessons from the gods themselves, teaching him the importance of humility, the value of companionship, and the inevitability of death. And as Gilgamesh returned from his journey, having learned these lessons, he found that his place in the world had changed. No longer driven solely by the desire for power, he returned to Uruk not as a conqueror, but as a wiser ruler. He understood now that the gods had shaped him, not to be a god himself, but to be a man who understood the limits of his own power. In that understanding, he found peace. The gods, though powerful and often wrathful, had not sought to break Gilgamesh. They had sought to mold him, to shape him into something greater than he had been. And in doing so, they had given him the greatest gift of all, the gift of wisdom, of knowing the value of life, of understanding that even the mightiest of kings must one day yield to the eternal forces that govern the world. The gods had not created Gilgamesh to be a god, but to be the first epic hero, a hero who, through his trials, would shape the very nature of what it meant to be human. The rain began, at first as a soft murmur, a whisper against the earth, but soon it turned to a roar, a deafening crash of water pouring from the heavens, drowning the world in its fury. People screamed, animals scattered, but the flood continued its endless, unstoppable march. The rivers, lakes, and seas merged into one, consuming everything in their path, sweeping away civilizations, leaving nothing but desolation. It was a flood not just of water, but of divine wrath. In the land of Mesopotamia, this wasn't the first time the gods had unleashed their fury upon humanity. In the myth of Atrahasis, a story older than many others in the ancient world, the gods' wrath was made manifest in a flood, one that sought to purge the earth of its inhabitants. This flood, like the one in the biblical tale of Noah's Ark, was not just a natural disaster. It was a message from the gods, a punishment for humanity's sins, a reminder of their power and control over life and death. The gods had created humans for a purpose, but over time, they had grown frustrated with their noisy, troublesome creations. The people of the earth, though numerous and diverse, had begun to displease the gods with their constant clamor, their inability to maintain order, their selfishness. In their eyes, humanity had become a nuisance, a source of chaos that disturbed the peace of the divine realm. So, the gods, particularly Enlil, the Lord of Storms, decided that the time had come to rid the world of this scourge. They gathered in council, discussing the fate of humanity. The flood would cleanse the earth, wiping out the population and leaving the world to start anew. It was a decision made in the silence of the heavens, an act of divine retribution for the chaos created by mankind. But there was one God, one who saw something different in humanity. Ea, the god of wisdom and water, was not content with the decision to annihilate the earth. In his eyes, there was still something redeemable in mankind, something worth saving. He did not agree with the rest of the gods. Instead of silently accepting their judgment, he chose to intervene. He went to Atrahasis, a man favored by the gods, and warned him of the coming destruction. Atrahasis, a wise and devout man, was given the task of building a boat, a vessel large enough to carry him, his family, and the creatures of the earth. The boat would be the ark, the salvation from the flood. It was not just an ark, but a symbol of divine mercy, a second chance. Atrahasis obeyed the god's command, constructing the great vessel, while the storm clouds loomed ever closer. The flood arrived with terrifying speed. The skies darkened, and the waters surged, rising higher and higher until the earth was completely submerged. But inside the ark, Atrahasis, his family, and the animals were safe. For days, they floated upon the endless sea, while the world around them drowned in the wrath of the gods. And as the floodwaters slowly began to recede, the sun emerged from behind the clouds. The rain stopped, and the world fell silent. When Atrahasis and his family finally emerged from the ark, they saw a world forever changed. The earth, once teeming with life, was now desolate and still. But there was hope, for they had survived. Humanity had been given a second chance. In the aftermath of the flood, the gods looked down upon Atrahasis and his family. Enlil, who had demanded the destruction of humanity, was angered to see that some had survived. But Ea, the merciful god, reminded him that the flood had been a necessary purge, a cleansing of the world's sins. It had allowed humanity to start fresh, to rebuild and renew their relationship with the divine. The parallels to the biblical story of Noah's Ark are undeniable. In both myths, a great flood is sent by the gods to cleanse the earth of the wickedness of humankind. In both stories, a chosen individual is warned and instructed to build a boat to save themselves and the creatures of the earth. And in both, after the waters recede, the survivors emerge into a new world, tasked with rebuilding and repopulating the earth. The flood is a punishment, but it is also an opportunity for redemption, a chance to begin again. But while Noah's Ark is often seen as a story of divine grace, the flood in the Atrahasis myth carries with it a sharper edge. The gods in the Atrahasis myth are more capricious, their anger more immediate and less forgiving. The flood is not just a cleansing, but a brutal reminder of the gods' power and their ability to destroy. Yet in both myths, there is an underlying theme of mercy, an acknowledgement that even in the face of divine wrath, there is room for salvation. The story of Atrahasis and the Great Flood is not just a tale of divine retribution, but a reflection of the relationship between gods and humans. The gods, though powerful and often vengeful, are not without compassion. They intervene when necessary, and through their intervention, they offer humanity a chance for redemption. The flood is not an end, but a new beginning, a chance to start fresh and rebuild what was lost. And just as the ark carried the survivors through the flood, so too do the stories of the great deluge carry with them lessons for those who listen. They remind us of the fragility of life, of the power of nature, and of the divine forces that shape our world. They tell us that no matter how far we may stray from the path, there is always a chance for renewal, for redemption, for a fresh start. And in the end, it is this message of hope, of mercy, and of rebirth that echoes through the myths of the flood, reminding us of the eternal power of the divine and the unbreakable bond between the gods and mankind. The sun burned high in the sky, casting long shadows over the land of Sumer. At the heart of the great city of Ur, the people gathered in reverence, their eyes fixed on the throne, upon which sat a man draped in royal robes. His face was a mask of divine authority, yet his eyes carried the weight of something far greater than earthly power. For in his heart, he was not merely a king, he was the chosen one of the gods. His rule was not his own, it was the will of the divine, a sacred trust bestowed upon him by forces beyond mortal comprehension. The belief that kings were divinely chosen was not merely a matter of politics, it was an ancient truth etched into the fabric of Mesopotamian society. The king, they believed, was not just a man, he was the earthly representative of the gods, their voice, their agent, their will made flesh. It was the king's duty to uphold divine order, to serve as the bridge between the gods and the people, ensuring that the sacred laws of the heavens were reflected in the daily lives of mortals. In the eyes of the people, the king was a god in human form, a living embodiment of the divine will. His authority was not earned through bloodshed or cunning, it was granted to him by the gods themselves. From the moment a king ascended to the throne, it was understood that he was chosen by the heavens to rule. He was anointed, not just with oil, but with the very essence of the divine. His actions were seen as direct extensions of the will of the gods, his decisions a reflection of their judgment. To question the king was to question the gods themselves. In the land of Sumer, the king was the earthly counterpart to the great sky god Anu, and it was through his rule that the gods ensured order and prosperity. The king's relationship with the gods was not one of mere devotion, it was a partnership. The gods provided the king with the divine wisdom and power to rule, and in return, the king ensured that the gods were honored and revered. Temples were built in their names, festivals were held in their honor, and sacrifices were made to ensure their favor. But the king's role was not only spiritual. He was also the enforcer of divine law. The gods were believed to have established a perfect order, an intricate web of justice, morality, and balance. It was the king's duty to ensure that this divine order was upheld on earth. He dispensed justice as the gods saw fit, punishing those who transgressed the sacred laws and rewarding those who remained loyal. His role was that of a shepherd, guiding his people with wisdom and strength, ensuring that they remained in the good graces of the gods. In Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian society, this concept of divine kingship was deeply ingrained. The kings were seen as the earthly agents of the gods, their decisions influenced not only by their human instincts, but also by divine guidance. The people believed that the gods would communicate their will through signs, omens, and dreams. A king might interpret the flight of birds or the shape of the stars as signs of divine favor or disfavor. When a king defeated an enemy in battle, it was not just his strength or strategy that led to victory, it was the will of the gods that ensured his success. The notion of divine kingship was not confined to war and governance alone. It shaped the very fabric of daily life. The king's presence was a constant reminder of the divine in human affairs. His role was not just that of a ruler, but that of a protector, a steward of the gods' creation. His power was both sacred and absolute, but it came with immense responsibility. He was not free to act as he wished, his every move was governed by the divine principles of justice and order. The gods did not simply grant him power, they also demanded that he wield it wisely, justly, and with great humility. As the centuries passed and empires rose and fell, the concept of divine kingship remained a cornerstone of Mesopotamian thought. The Babylonian king Hammurabi, for example, famously claimed that his law code was given to him by the gods. His laws were not merely human decrees, they were the very will of the divine, etched in stone for all to see. To follow these laws was to live in harmony with the gods, to defy them was to risk divine retribution. The king's divine mandate was also seen in his role as a warrior. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero king was not only a ruler but a defender of his people, chosen by the gods to lead them into battle. His victories were seen as proof of his divine favor, and his strength was attributed not just to his own prowess but to the blessing of the gods. When kings led their armies to battle, it was understood that they did so with the gods at their side. The gods were not distant and detached, they were active participants in the affairs of men, guiding their chosen kings to victory. In the Assyrian Empire, this divine kingship was taken to even greater extremes. The king was seen as the earthly representative of the great god Ashur, and it was believed that Ashur himself fought alongside the king in battle. Assyrian kings often depicted themselves as divine warriors, leading their troops into battle with the blessing of their gods. The king's victories were not just military conquests, they were sacred triumphs, proof that the gods had chosen him to rule and that his enemies were enemies of the divine order itself. But divine kingship was not always a position of unchallenged power. The gods were not without their tempers, and kings could fall out of favor if they failed to uphold the divine mandate. In the Mesopotamian world, the king was always under the watchful eyes of the gods. He was constantly subject to divine judgment, and his actions were scrutinized by both mortal and immortal beings alike. If he failed in his duty to the gods, the consequences could be severe. The fall of a king could mean the fall of his empire, a divine punishment for failing to uphold the sacred laws. And so, the belief in divine kingship was both a source of strength and a heavy burden. The king was not just a ruler, he was the living embodiment of the gods' will on earth. His authority was sacred, his power divinely ordained. But it was also fragile. To lose favor with the gods was to lose everything. The weight of the throne was heavy, for it was not just a seat of power, it was a seat of divine judgment, a position that demanded not just leadership but reverence, humility, and constant vigilance. The people, in turn, saw the king as a divine protector, a beacon of hope, and a symbol of the gods' eternal presence in their lives. In the ruler's strength, they saw the strength of the gods. In his wisdom, they saw the guidance of the heavens. And in his rule, they saw the unbreakable bond between the divine and the mortal, a bond that held the very fabric of their world together. The great city of Babylon, once a beacon of power, wisdom, and divine authority, stood in silence as the winds of change began to blow across the land. The ziggurats, towering structures that had once touched the heavens, now seemed to sag under the weight of time. The gods, once so vivid in the lives of the people, now seemed distant and cold, their statues cracked, their altars gathering dust. The people who had once sought the favor of Marduk, Inanna, and Shamash now found their faith shaken, their beliefs stretched by foreign ideas, new gods, and shifting cultural tides. The decline of Mesopotamian religion did not happen in an instant. It was a slow, painful process, a quiet unraveling that spanned centuries. It began with the rise of foreign powers, empires that sought not just land and riches but the transformation of the very cultural fabric that had held Mesopotamia together for so long. As the Persians marched across the land, bringing with them their own gods and customs, the ancient Mesopotamian pantheon began to lose its grip. The once proud Babylonians, who had declared Marduk the supreme god, now found themselves under the influence of a new divine order. The Persian kings, with their own religious systems centered around the god Ahura Mazda, imposed their beliefs on the conquered lands. Temples to Babylonian gods were abandoned, their sacred fires extinguished, and new altars were raised to foreign deities. The once strong faith of the people began to waver, torn between the old and the new. It wasn't just the Persians who reshaped the spiritual landscape of Mesopotamia. The Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, swept through the region like a tempest. With them came the pantheon of Greek gods, Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, who, to many, seemed so much more alluring than the ancient gods of Mesopotamia. The Greeks brought with them not only their gods, but their culture, philosophy, and ways of thinking. The ancient rituals of Mesopotamian religion, which had once been so intricate and full of meaning, now seemed outdated in the face of the Greek gods' more accessible and humanized nature. The temples to Marduk, once adorned with golden statues and filled with the prayers of devoted worshippers, began to decay as Greek ideas crept into every corner of society. The once sacred rituals were replaced with Hellenistic practices, blending together the gods of the Greeks and the local deities. New gods, new philosophies, and new ways of life gradually began to dilute the ancient Mesopotamian traditions, causing them to lose their former significance. But it wasn't just foreign powers and their gods that led to the decline of Mesopotamian religion. There was a deeper, more internal shift at work. As the centuries wore on, the city-states and empires of Mesopotamia began to weaken from within. The people, who had once looked to their kings and priests as divine representatives, began to question their authority. The idea that the gods ruled the world with an iron fist began to falter. The divine kingship, which had once been the cornerstone of Mesopotamian society, started to lose its power as rulers became more corrupt and disconnected from their people. As the Mesopotamians faced political instability, economic hardship, and frequent wars, their faith in the gods began to wane. The gods, who had once been seen as active participants in the lives of men, seemed distant, their actions unclear and irrelevant in a world that was changing faster than anyone could keep up. Temples, once filled with the sound of hymns and prayers, now echoed with silence. The rituals that had once tied people together in worship seemed more like hollow traditions, their meaning lost to the changing tides of time. The rise of new religions also contributed to the decline. Christianity, which had spread through the Roman Empire, began to take root in the eastern regions of Mesopotamia. With its message of salvation, grace, and eternal life, Christianity offered something the ancient Mesopotamian gods no longer seemed able to provide. The Christian faith was not just another religion, it was a transformative force that challenged the very structure of Mesopotamian society. The ancient gods of Mesopotamia, once so intertwined with daily life, now seemed impotent in the face of the new spiritual awakening sweeping through the land. As the years passed and the Roman Empire expanded, Christianity's influence only grew stronger. The ancient rituals of Mesopotamian religion, once vibrant and full of life, began to fade into obscurity. Temples were abandoned or repurposed. The gods were forgotten, their stories relegated to the past, their names whispered only in the shadows of old ruins. The worshippers who had once prayed to Marduk, Ishtar, and Nergal now found themselves drawn to a new path, one that promised salvation through faith in a single, all-powerful God. The final blow came when the Sassanid Empire rose to power in the east, bringing with it Zoroastrianism as the state religion. Zoroastrianism, with its focus on the eternal struggle between light and darkness, good and evil, seemed to resonate with the people of Mesopotamia in ways that the old gods no longer could. The Zoroastrian faith, much like Christianity, offered a more personal, individual connection to the divine. It was a religion that emphasized morality, righteousness, and the purification of the soul, concepts that had little room for the capricious, often vengeful gods of Mesopotamian tradition. And so, one by one, the great gods of Mesopotamia were forgotten. The mighty gods of the ziggurats, the great city-states, and the ancient rituals that once defined the region's culture faded into history. The legacy of these gods lived on in the stories, in the ancient texts, in the ruins of their once great cities. But the belief in them, the faith that had sustained generations, was gone. The divine kingship, the sacred rituals, and the ancient pantheon were slowly eclipsed by the rising tide of new ideas and beliefs. In the end, the decline of Mesopotamian religion was not the result of one single event, but a slow, gradual shift, a transformation brought about by foreign invasions, cultural changes, and the rise of new, more personal faiths. The gods of Mesopotamia, once so vibrant and full of power, now live only in the pages of ancient texts and the silent ruins of lost cities. Yet, their influence can still be felt in the world today, in the myths, the stories, and the lessons they left behind. For even though the gods of Mesopotamia have faded from the world, their legacy endures, woven into the very fabric of human history. The first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting their golden light over the ancient ruins of Babylon. Beneath the dust of ages, beneath the crumbled stone of the ziggurats, lay the whispers of a past that still lingered in the air. The gods of Mesopotamia, Marduk, Inanna, Enki, had long since faded from the prayers of men, but their influence remained woven into the very fabric of modern beliefs. It was as if, even in their silence, the ancient gods continued to shape the spiritual paths that led humanity forward. The gods of Mesopotamia were more than mere figures of worship. They were the foundation of entire systems of thought, belief, and societal structure. They were the mirror through which humans viewed the world. Their gods reflected the forces of nature, the rhythms of life, and the very essence of existence itself. And though the civilizations that worshipped them vanished, their ideas, their stories, and their divine figures would echo through the ages. Take the story of the Great Flood. In the ancient Mesopotamian texts, the tale of a great deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the earth is one of the most enduring. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, who, warned by the gods of a coming flood, built a boat to save his family and a sampling of the world's creatures. This narrative was not confined to Mesopotamia alone. It traveled through the centuries, eventually weaving itself into the biblical story of Noah's Arkansas. The idea of divine retribution through flood, a cleansing of humanity's sins, became a cornerstone of Judeo-Christian theology and even further into Islamic tradition. But it wasn't just the flood myth that survived. The very structure of the gods, their interactions with humans, their jealousy, their love, their punishments and rewards, had a profound influence on the way later religions perceived the divine. Mesopotamian gods were not abstract forces, they were personal, emotional, and deeply involved in the affairs of humanity. Their stories were filled with conflict, betrayal, love, and tragedy. This humanizing of the divine found its way into the pantheons of Greece and Rome, where gods like Zeus and Hera quarreled like mere mortals, and later in the development of Christianity, where God was both omnipotent and deeply compassionate, capable of wrath, but also capable of love. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Mesopotamian gods was their role in the creation of human life. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, was credited with shaping humanity from clay, an image that mirrored many later creation myths. The idea that gods were responsible for creating humans, often out of something as humble as clay or dust, found its way into numerous religious stories. The Judeo-Christian creation story, in which God forms Adam from the dust of the earth, is a direct descendant of these early myths. In this sense, the Mesopotamians set the stage for how humanity would later see itself as the creation of divine hands, imbued with a spark of something greater. The concept of divine kingship, of rulers being chosen by the gods, was another Mesopotamian legacy that deeply influenced later religious and political thought. The idea that kings ruled by divine right was not just a convenient political tool, it was a deeply ingrained belief in Mesopotamian culture. Kings like Hammurabi of Babylon were not merely political leaders, they were the representatives of the gods on earth. This notion of divine kingship spread to other cultures, where rulers were seen as appointed by gods to lead their people. In medieval Europe, monarchs ruled by the divine right of kings, and even today, the idea of a leader chosen by divine will persist in some religious and political systems. Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, left a particular mark on the world's mythologies. Her descent into the underworld and her eventual resurrection would become a powerful symbol in many cultures. This myth of life, death, and rebirth resonated deeply with the human condition and was echoed in the later myths of Persephone in Greek mythology and the death and resurrection of Christ in Christianity. Inanna's journey mirrored the cycles of nature and the rhythms of human existence, reminding us of the inevitable journey from life to death and the possibility of renewal. The themes of justice and cosmic order that the Mesopotamian gods embodied also left an indelible mark. Shamash, the sun god and god of justice, was not only a symbol of light but also the enforcer of fairness. His principles of justice echoed through time, influencing the legal systems of ancient civilizations, including the famous Code of Hammurabi. In this code, Hammurabi, inspired by Shamash, laid out laws that were meant to bring order to society and uphold justice. This idea of law and order, of divine influence on human morality, would be inherited by countless civilizations and eventually become a pillar of modern legal systems. As the centuries passed, and as empires rose and fell, the Mesopotamian gods gradually faded into the background. But their influence on later religions and mythologies remained undeniable. From the Bible to Greek mythology to the religious practices of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamian deities served as the blueprint for the gods that would follow. Even the symbolism of their sacred animals, such as the bull and the lion, continued to appear in later iconography. In the quieter moments of reflection, one can feel the pulse of Mesopotamian religion still echoing in the world today. From the rhythms of the seasons to the quest for justice, from the eternal battle between life and death to the desire for divine favor, the ancient gods continue to shape the way humanity understands its place in the world. The echoes of Marduk's victory over chaos, of Inanna's love and wrath, and of Enki's wisdom still resonate in our myths, our beliefs, and even in our daily lives. They may no longer be worshipped in temples or adored in the grand ziggurats of Babylon, but they live on in the stories we tell, in the choices we make, and in the way we see the divine in ourselves and in each other.